Welcome, everybody, to SteeleWatching, the podcast for Remington Steele fans. I am this week's featured movie star. Yay! Eric.
And I am this week's featured, I guess, movie star as well,
Yes.
Sara.
Hey, I mean, this episode's full of stars, so why can't we be stars too?
I think we should be.
Yes.
Agreed.
So, anyway, yes, Season 3, Episode 9, Cast in Steele, where we have Dorothy Lamour, Virginia Mayo, and Lloyd Nolan as guest stars, kind of portraying themselves, but not really, but sort of.
I have to admit, this is a particular favorite thing for me when I see this in TV shows and movies, when guest stars do their own cameos of themselves, because I feel like it does two things. One, it gives the audience a chance to share the in-joke or share the punchline, basically, and it also gives the star a chance to tongue-in-cheek play a portion of themselves that either people have thought that they really are or that they just want to mess around with. Like, I have a couple of thoughts on this later on, but yeah, I really love it when TV shows and movies do this, because it's a lot of fun. And in this case, it gave me a chance to learn about some older movie stars that I might not necessarily have known too much about otherwise. Even, I mean, not talk about their actual personalities, but their biography and some of the movies they did and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's the thing about these types of situations is they're not really playing themselves. They're playing fictionalized versions of themselves, but it's still fun.
But and I mean, one might argue that that's kind of the point, because I mean, these are people that we think we know as fans because of the persona that has been created either by their publicist or by themselves or whoever's doing the spin. But obviously, you don't really know these people unless you are actually a friend of theirs or an intimate of theirs. So they're kind of playing on that idea that we think we know these people, but we really don't.
Yeah. And it occurred to me as I was working on my notes and such that I wonder if let me get a couple things out of the way that'll maybe give it a little more context. Okay. The episode first aired on December 4th, 1984. Was written by Jeff Melvoin and directed by Harry Harris. Now, when Jeff wrote this, I don't know Jeff. I don't know anything about Jeff. I will admit that right now. But, and by the way, our notes for the episode information that we just gave came from Judith's book. We have forgotten to mention her for the last few episodes, and I apologize, Judith. We really do need to give you credit for...
Her book is fantastic.
For the production information that you give us from that and let us use. Yes, fantastic book. Judith Moose Steele loved after all these years. So yeah, there we go. Tip of the hat to the fair lady. But I don't know Jeff Melvoin, but I kind of envisioned this thing where he said, I'm going to look at the characters that these three actors played, the types of characters that they were known for playing, and I'm going to play off of that, because Lloyd Nolan, caustic, sarcastic,
he's great.
Constantly busting Steele's chops.
I love it. I love it.
And
it's my
so
favorite thing about the episode.
So he's played a police officer of various types over the course of his career, and so. As a guy who has this experience as a police officer, I play one on TV, so I know what it's all about.
I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV.
That's right. And so you get this thing about actors where they think they are experts in something because they spent 3 weeks playing a character. Yeah. And so, like in Lloyd Nolan's case, he comes off as this guy who thinks he's a knowledgeable, experienced police officer because he played a police officer in a couple of movies, and Dorothy Lamour as the kind of caustic, no nonsense, tough dame.
Yep.
And Virginia Mayo is kind of the sweet, innocent, kind of maybe very generous and, forgiving type person. So I think that these are all caricatures of the characters that they have played in the movies over the years.
And I guess this is where maybe I'll mention this because I was going to save it for later, but it's a good segue. It makes me think
But I ruined it.
Well, no, you just gave a good opening. If you've ever... you watch Star Trek, and anyone who has seen Star Trek The Next Generation knows that Wesley Crusher was not a fan favorite. When Will Wheaton was on that show, there was very much a lot of criticism that was unfairly heaped at Will Wheaton. He was just an actor doing a job, but because Wesley Crusher was kind of the boy wonder who was often more competent than the adults, always saving the day, very much yeah, exactly. So the Kill Wesley Crusher and all these memes, or not well, they eventually became memes, but like just this attitude towards his character and consequently towards Wheaton was very negative. And I have read, Will Wheaton has written 2 memoirs. One is written called Just a Geek. The second is called Still Just a Geek. And it's basically his first memoir. He's just annotated and sort of added more context to it. And he talks about his traumatic childhood, the fact that his parents were horrifically abusive, how his character in Stand By Me was very much his character, like him as a human being. Like that was Rob Reiner took what they were feeling and kind of made it into a film. And he talks about his complicated relationship with Wesley Crusher because he hated playing that role, left Star Trek, wanted to leave Star Trek behind, found he couldn't, and couldn't find work for years because he was quote unquote not edgy enough. That was what the studios kept telling him. So eventually he got this role on The Big Bang Theory as himself. Sheldon, the character, Sheldon is obsessed with Wesley Crusher as his enemy. He hates him. Or Will Wheaton, sorry. He hates Will Wheaton because Will Wheaton, I guess, refused to sign something at a convention once. I don't know. It's really silly. But throughout...
All made up, of course.
He has 16 episodes where he does a cameo version of himself as kind of a villain. And he has said in his memoir that this was one of his favorite roles to play because he basically got to be an evil version of himself where he could be a dick and just be total jerk and loved it. Like he was able to tell off everybody he wanted to tell off, and it was very cathartic for him. And if you watch the show, you can see the parts of himself that he's wanting us to see, the parts that were, conflicted about Star Trek and all the other stuff. It's really quite cool. And this is one of the reasons why I love it when you get that, because there's the caricatures and then there's a bit of the person and you put the two together and they end up being a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So that was kind of made me think about that. I also wondered, how big is their budget this season?
I don't know.
Because not only have they been to Europe a bajillion times by this point, they've had Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford, as well as Virginia Mayo, Lloyd Nolan. Like, how are they getting the money to pay these guest stars who, to be fair, are not in the prime of their careers anymore, but still would command a respectable salary as opposed to your everyday daily guest star, plus all their frequent flyer miles. Like, I just gotta think
they cash the frequent flyer miles in to pay for the cast.
Kidding. Like, their budget must be through the roof this season. It's crazy.
Well, I'm going to say that these actors and the ball players that they had, I suspect that they did not have a huge paycheck for them because they were past their prime in terms of the demand for their services. They really probably weren't doing much working at this point. And so if somebody comes along and says, hey, I got this part for you, and it's not going to pay a lot, but it's a chance to do some work and pick up a paycheck. Plus, keeps your qualifications and SAG-AFTRA going, because you have to do so much work. As I understand it, you have to do so much work a year or earn so much a year in order to keep current with them. So if they were, I need some extra work. Oh, here's this. Okay, yeah, and I get to play a version of myself for fun. Yeah, I can see them doing it without commanding a big paycheck. So,
well, I didn't mean that it was super, super huge, but it probably was bigger than your average daily guest star that you get on the show. The same, I guess, for
but
somebody...
I'm going to guess it's not that much more.
Fair enough.
So, Anyway, let's get on to the TV guide listing, courtesy of Judith Moose. Dorothy Lamour, Virginia Mayo, and Lloyd Nolan hire Laura and Remington to find out who's behind the curious fan mail they received, not to mention the attempts on their life that followed. So, I do have to say, I love the plot of the episode. I love the whole concept of the episode, except I hate flashback episodes.
I was going to say this rarely works for me too, mainly because, I'm honestly not even sure why. I think it just, I just want to see the episode as is. I don't know that I necessarily need, I think that they just needed a way to work Mildred in because there wasn't really space for her in the plot. So I can sort of see why it was done this frame narrative, but.
And I think also because it gave them a joke at the end.
Yeah, and maybe that's it. They're working up to a punchline that never really pays off in the way that I think it's supposed to. We're supposed to be this again makes me think of, and I know I've already mentioned this analogy, but the show This Is Us, how you're waiting to find out how Jack dies, and it's from the crock pot and everything. But it's when you string something along that long, it better be really good. Otherwise, it feels like you've been waiting all this time and they fell off a ladder. Okay, well, especially when it's like, is that how you got hurt? No, keep listening. Is that how you got? No, keep going. Like, okay.
Well, it was bad enough in the TV shows from the 70s, 80s, 90s where they did it like this. Now, it's even worse now because what they'll do is they will show you the hero runs into a room and suddenly you hear this click and you see the bad guy and he's got the drop on the hero and he's got a gun pointed at him and you see the bad guy pull the trigger and then flashback to 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
To me, and I don't want this to come out sounding excessively critical. And I Jeff, if you're listening, or anybody's telling you about this episode of our podcast, please understand this is not personal and I'm not making a judgment on you specifically. This is just my feeling about the whole concept of flashback.
It's very
episodes.
Personal. You should go to Eric's house and tell him so. Sorry.
Yeah, right. To me, it feels like, okay, we've got a plot for an episode. That's okay. It's not great. We got to hook the viewing audience into it so they'll stick around to the end because we really don't feel that strongly in the story. That's kind of how it comes off, especially the modern version of that, where, like I said, they show you the hero in peril, maybe in danger of losing their life or whatever, and then they jump back to 3 weeks, earlier or a month or what, however far back they go, and then they come back up to this point, and then they carry it forward. It's like, yeah, it's a cheap trick.
So I'm gonna push back on that only a tiny bit because for the most part I agree with you, but there are some times where it can serve the story and do it well. There's one TV show, I don't know if you've ever seen a show called Flashpoint, but it's probably not because it's a Canadian cop show, but it's done in such a way. Every episode is like that. Every single episode starts with the case, whatever the case happens to be, in its crisis point, in the sort of climactic moment of the episode. And oftentimes it will start with the guest characters, whoever it is that the team is trying to save or trying to help, in a moment of extreme danger, right? And then it'll go back a day, 2 days, however many days it needs to go back in order to tell how we got to that point. And it does it that way because it gives us this picture and allows us to make an assumption. This is the bad guy. This is the good guy. And then it'll go back and show us what events led up to that moment. And that kind of, a lot of the time, makes us reevaluate those initial assumptions about bad and good and who's a villain and why, or gives context to their behavior that we might not have immediately assigned to them. And it's an interesting show because it doesn't have a lot of stuff about the characters' personal lives. Most of it is the case. You get tidbits here and there as they're a special unit team, but we don't really get a lot of extra stuff. It's mainly just the case.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it works because, like I said, every episode is like that. The whole point of it is to kind of make us re-examine and show how these characters got to that point. And there's been a few instances in TV shows that I've watched that don't normally do it that way, where they've done it that way, and they've done it to show us a moment where the character is behaving extremely out of character and then give us that lead up as to how they got there. But yeah, it does kind of feel like it's a gimmick, and it's not always used well. And so I think when it's used poorly, and I think with this episode, we're just supposed to, it's a how they got the injury story.
Mm-hmm.
It is a gimmick. I think it's done because, like I said, there wasn't really room in the plot for Mildred, so they tack her on as the narrator, and they tell the story that way. It's not my favorite, but
I did think about that as being the reason for it, and the only way they got Mildred into it. And I got to say that I suspect Doris Roberts was a bit disappointed not having the opportunity to work with
because I imagine that she saw them on set, but she wouldn't have had any. She didn't have any scenes with them.
She didn't have any scenes with them. So the only way she would even see them on set is if she came in. On
the same day,
the days when she wasn't actually working.
That's true, because her scenes could have been filmed in a day, less than that, because it literally was just the tags to the scenes, and then they'd film all the other stuff. So you're right. They might not have interacted at all.
Yeah. But, still continuing the discussion of flashback episodes, the one show that I've seen in my history of TV watching that I think did flashbacks well, because they didn't do it this like these newer TV shows do, was the Dick Van Dyke Show. Because what they did was they would frame a story, and then they would jump back, not a few weeks, a few hours. They jumped back years. And what they were doing was they were telling a story of how Rob and Laura met while he was in the military X number of years ago. So it wasn't that the story they were telling really had any relationship to the current situation where, how did you get injured? Well, I'm getting up to that, or anything like that. It was literally a story plucked out of time that they were telling, and in order to make it work in the show, they framed it as a flashback so that they could do this, go back to his military days, his first days as a writer on the TV show. So that is one place where I think it worked well. Generally speaking, I don't like flashback episodes, so
it could be worse. This episode is not nearly as bad as the ending to How I Met Your Mother, because if you think about it, and I don't know if you ever saw that show, but the entire premise of the show was a flashback. Every single episode started with the two teenage kids of the protagonist as he's basically narrating how he met their mother. And so we get 7 seasons worth, or however many seasons it was, of him and no mother in sight. Like, she's not there. He's having this on again, off again relationship with Colby Smolder's character, all the way up to the very final season where we're like, okay, we're finally going to get to find out how he met their mother, because this entire show is a flashback. And he meets her, he falls in love, she dies of cancer, and then he basically ends the show by saying, so I'm really into Robin, the girl that was the on and off again love story for the 7. I think I'm going to date her. Is that cool? And you're sitting there like, are you freaking kidding me? I watched 7 years of this show to find, and the mom died. Like, so yeah, could be worse. That's all I'm saying.
So
anyway. I've saved anybody. If anybody's planning on watching that show, I'm going to save you the trouble. The ending was so bad that, don't.
So anyway, let's get into the episode. It starts out in the present, in a hospital. Staff is busy, moving in and out of rooms, down halls. A nurse rushes past the desk where Mildred is standing, holding a flower arrangement. And as the nurse passes, Mildred tries to talk to her, but the nurse ignores her. And so Mildred looks around, sees another staff member down a side hallway. It's a man walking her direction, head down, engrossed in what is presumably a patient chart. Mildred approaches him and begins to make an inquiry, But without even looking up at her, he admonishes her to go to the admissions desk and don't bother the medical staff.
I mean, where did he get his bedside manner from? A cereal box? I get that they're busy, but that's rude. That is condescending and really rude. Like, come on, dude. You just have to say, sorry, I can't help you. Check at reception.
Yeah. Just because you don't have the answer doesn't mean you have to be rude about saying you don't have the answer.
Yeah, that's not the kind of guy you want giving you your cancer diagnosis, is all I'm going to say. According to
you're
medical...
going to die, so what?
Yeah, you know what? You got about I if you ever wanted to go skydiving, I'd do that because it's not going to matter. Like that's what I would have expected from that guy.
So, yes. So anyway, he continues walking past her and then walks away, and she scowls at his back saying that there's no one at the admissions desk. And then she continues down the hall, and we see an operation underway, Mildred peeking in through the window of the door of the operating room. So is that really how that works?
That was my question, because I thought that, and to be fair, I've never had surgery, so and I don't live in the U.S., so maybe it's different there, but I always thought that there was like an operating theater. I didn't think that surgeries took place in the rooms. I thought they took you to...
Yeah, it wouldn't be in a place where people are just the public. Yeah, like visitors,
I don't think you
are
can
just
walking
walking past.
Yeah, because it's got to be sterile and stuff. Like it...
well, not only that, it's just it's a controlled area.
Yeah.
You only should be back there if you have a legitimate reason, authorization, but just not somebody wandering around and, oh, here's an operating room. I think I'm going to go in. No, it doesn't happen that way. So anyway, yes, Mildred scowls in through the window, and then next we see her at the far end of a hallway speaking to a nurse who points down the hall. And then Mildred walks and approaches a door to a room, which is apparently where the nurse had directed her. Yeah. And she pauses and listens. And then we hear, I assure you, Laura, if I'd heard you, I wouldn't have gone into the building. And then Laura responds to Steele, I'll bet. When have you ever listened to me before? Yeah. That seems like an unnecessary argument.
I get that the narrative purpose was so that she could hear their voices, but it definitely, and I know they're in the freeze and yada, 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 but I don't know. It feels like it could have been maybe a little more playful, a little bit more friendly, at least. They just seem to be so, there's so much animosity in these episodes lately that it's tiring.
So anyway, Mildred enters the room. She sees what's inside. Her eyes get big and wide, and then with a shocked voice asks, what happened? And then we see Steele in a hospital bed, one arm and a leg, each in a cast, each suspended from various medical torture devices. Laura said...
So I've never broken anything, hence why I don't, and I've never had surgery. So this is my question here. Does a cast have to be suspended? Because theoretically, when he gets out, he can't lay like that forever. So why is he?
I've always wondered about that and wondered if it was
marionette.
Just strictly a TV thing. Years ago, I joined my kids in breaking the family rule. No broken bones.
Oh.
Everyone, I think, well, maybe our oldest daughter didn't break anything, but the rest of our kids did some very amazing breaks to their bodies. Outstanding. My kids are world class when it comes to breaking their bones.
It's funny because neither myself nor any of my siblings ever broke a bone. And I don't think Scott has ever broken one, and fingers crossed, knock on wood, Kira hasn't yet either. But so, wow, yeah, yours must have been jumping off of rooftops or something.
Well, close.
Oh, okay.
The two I can remember distinctly, our youngest daughter, when she was probably, it would have been like 6, 7, 8, whatever. I mean, she was always the kid who was, oh, my brothers are doing that. I can do that too.
Yeah.
You know, and not only that, but I'm going to do it better. And they were out climbing a tree, and she decided to out climb them until she didn't. And she landed and she fractured the orbit of her eye socket.
Ouch.
Yeah. Didn't do any.
That sounds painful.
Her in any significant manner, any other way, but yeah, did that.
Yeah. Oof.
And then our youngest son decided to ride his bike off of a ramp in the middle of a rainstorm on a muddy pathway or something. And he jumps off the ramp and he lands and he loses it and wipes out. He breaks his collarbone. And
I'm told that's painful.
Well, yeah, he did it really well, because usually, from what the doctors told us, when somebody breaks their collarbone, it breaks it into 2 pieces, but they're still basically in line.
Right.
And so they go in and they, just put them back together and say, okay, super glue, there you go. No, he broke his. One piece was sticking up. It didn't puncture the skin, but it was definitely out of line. And they had to have the surgeon that did his surgery on that collarbone was like the leading guy in Oregon. He was the top-notch guy in doing these types of breaks. And he said, this is not the worst collarbone break he had ever seen. It was only the second worst he had ever seen.
Geez. Well, that's good.
And I wound up in the hospital because I took a dive off of a staircase at a dock. Wasn't intentional by any means.
Oh, no.
And the 2 things I did, one of which required a cast. I shattered the ball of humerus on my shoulder. And yeah, the doctor said, well, it looks like an eggshell that you took and just beat up. And this they couldn't do anything with. So they just said, try not to move it. Someday you'll have to have it surgically replaced. I'm well past that point now. But the other injury I did that required the cast was I split the kneecap on that side. And I could literally put my finger between the top and the bottom half of my kneecap. I don't remember them putting my leg up in any kind of a traction or anything like that. It was in a cast. That was it.
I just always thought that like traction like that was if you couldn't move it at all for whatever reason. And
except that if you look at these things in this show and other shows where they do it, it's hanging by a wire from a suspended thing. You can move that. Yeah.
So and now hearing your stories, I'm thinking that I must have a horseshoe up several orifices, because I was an idiot as a kid. Like I used to swing as high as I could and leap off the swings. I used to ride my scooter. My scooter had handlebars that you could pull down. So I'd sit on the base of the scooter and I'd literally like ride it down, like let it roll down the street into the highway, and somehow it didn't get hit. And when I was old enough to drink and young enough not to know better, my friend and I got really, really drunk, and we decided to go snowboarding at like 3 a.m. And we did not realize that it had frozen, like the hill had frozen. It was ice. So somehow we managed to snowboard that entire night and not break any bones. So I don't know how that happened, but I must be made of rubber, because hearing those stories, I'm thinking, wow, I guess I just was an idiot and got really lucky. So,
but yeah, I've seen these types of things in other episodes of other shows, and to me, it just never made any sense. Maybe there's somebody out there who's a doctor or medical professional that can answer this question as to what that is, why it is.
Why? Please let us know. Send us an email, because I'm genuinely curious as to whether it's just a visual cue to make us go, oh my gosh, they really got hurt, or if there's literally a reason for because it's not his whole, it's his arm and his leg that are hanging, and the rest of them is not. So
yeah. And like I said, because they're hanging from ropes or cables or whatever from a crossbar that's up above or whatever, it's not like they can't move it, because they can.
And also,
if they didn't want it moved, they would attach it to a rod.
Wasn't Laura was also in a full body cast in Dreams of Steel at the end, if you remember. Like she had a whole how many, I know we've been counting his concussions, but holy crap, they've got to have a lot of broken bones at this point. Because not only that, but the Steele eligible, didn't he break both his legs in that one too?
Yes.
The doctors are going to be taking a look at their x-rays and going, are you guys okay? Like, do we need to have a chat? Like,
and can you imagine the insurance premiums for the agency?
Right?
The workers' comp and the liability and all.
It'd be higher ridiculous. Than a stuntman, like it'd be higher than Tom Cruise on his latest movie. They'd just be like, you guys are terrible to insure here.
So anyway, as I said, we see Steele in a hospital bed, one arm in a cast and such, and Laura sitting on the edge of bed, one arm in a cast, a crutch under her other arm, and a neck collar on. And then, of course, beside the bed is a wine chiller holding a bottle of champagne, because why not? I'm sorry.
I mean, you could smoke in hospitals at this point, so this doesn't actually seem particularly out of the realm of possibility.
Point taken.
But what kills me is that they're drinking out of a beaker.
Yeah.
And I love it, because this is, I'm going to tell a weird story, but when my dad was in the hospital when he had cancer and he went into palliative care, we went up to visit him. This was actually the night before he passed away. And he and my daughter had a popsicle together, but they didn't have anywhere to set the popsicles down. So he had the nurse bring him an unused and clean bedpan. And I swear to God, I have a picture of the two of them sitting together, and his popsicle is in the bedpan. It's just like, so this made me think of that, because I was like, well, I guess when you don't have the materials, you use what you can. Because when I was in university and I was a broke student, I remember me and my roommates, we wanted to make cookies, and we didn't have a measuring cup, so we used the laundry scooper to measure. We cleaned it, so they taste mildly of soap, but they were great. So, I like the ingenuity here of the beakers.
Yeah. So they are drinking from beakers, and they greet Mildred and offer her a glass of her own, or a beaker of her own. Yeah. And of course, in response to her earlier question about what happened, Steele tells Mildred that it's a long story. And as he reaches up and presses the nurse call button, and then he asks the nurse for an additional beaker for Mildred's use. Mildred picks up again on her earlier question, saying that she thought the two of them were merely going on some event to an award ceremony over the weekend. And Laura unhappily says, well, that was their first mistake. Steele disagrees slightly, saying that surely she can't say that it wasn't all worthwhile, to which Laura suggests that he get back to her after she has healed. Mm-hmm. And Mildred, of course, isn't happy with the lack of information being offered. She insists that somebody tell her what happened. So now we jump back in time. Gotta get back in time. Thank you, Huey Lewis.
I think, and again, I don't want to harp on the point, but the fact that they could have just said, we fell off a ladder here.
Yeah.
I get it. We need to know. But
this episode would work just fine if they eliminated all of the hospital scenes and just, and maybe picked it up at the very end after they fall off the ladder.
Yeah.
That would actually might have been better. But yeah, as you pointed out, then Doris Roberts would not have been in the episode to speak of.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we jump back in time. We see that it's night. There are searchlights out, attracting people's attention, and limos pulling up in front of waiting crowds. And in a voiceover, Laura begins telling the story. She and Mr. Steele had been invited to the opening ceremonies of the Hollywood Archives, an organization for the preservation and study of the American movie. Never mind that the film studios let all their films deteriorate in non-climate controlled warehouses where they just stick them and...
I wondered about that, because I know that, for example, to be fair, for the longest time, they didn't think that movies were worth preserving, or TV shows, because the BBC, for example, lost several episodes of Doctor Who, in some cases entire series, because they didn't think that people would want to watch the episodes again. So they just sort of stuck them in a warehouse somewhere. And I think at one point it flooded, so they lost a bunch of the Patrick Troughton Doctor Who episodes. But Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. I wonder, does this exist? Do these archives exist, or is this something that they've made up for the sake of the plot? Because it doesn't seem like there. I know a lot of movies now are being remastered, so there does seem to be an awareness now of their historical value. But
there is the Association of Moving Image Archivists Museum, the Hollywood Heritage Museum. There's, it doesn't. Well, let's see. Yeah, Hollywood Heritage Museum looks like it would probably be about the closest. AFISA. What is that? Oh, that's a
American Film something.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are, I guess, now some organizations. It looks like that are kind of unofficial organizations trying to urge the preservation and restoration of films. But yeah, I mean, it just never made any sense to me that you would spend all this money filming these movies or TV shows or whatever, and then you just, okay, well, it's one and done. We're just going to trash it. In fact, back in, I'm trying to think, like early days of radio and early videotaped shows, they would just actually destroy the content. If it was a show filmed on videotape, like the early Super Bowls, we're done with that. We sent out the videotapes to the local network shows, and yeah, we pulled all the clips out of them. We're going to just erase over it so we can reuse the tape. In the old days, recordings, they would reuse the master discs. They would just pull the wax off and re-wax them and reuse them. It's just like there was no respect for the content that they spent their time and energy and money creating. It's just like, yeah.
Well, I mean, I would argue prior to VHS and VCRs, they probably didn't think there was any point because people couldn't have home versions of these things. So if they basically assumed it was going to be screened. Like if you look at silent movies and stuff, it would have its day in theaters, and then what would you do with it? It would, right? But I agree.
You could re-show them at some later time. The secondary markets or festivals. It's just, even if you don't know immediately what the future value of it is, why waste it? Why let it ruin? Why destroy it?
You said yourself they're reusing a lot of like the celluloid and the materials, I think, and especially if we're looking at like wartime era and Depression era stuff, you didn't have those materials. There was rationing and whatnot. So I think a lot of it was necessity. You assume that it's and at that point, it wasn't really thought of as art. It was just entertainment. Who cares, right? It wasn't. And I'm not saying I agree with that, but that was probably the predominant line of thinking. And then once we had VCRs and the ability to have home movies and syndication where you've got reruns, and they realize, we can syndicate a TV show and run it till doomsday and make money off the advertising, suddenly that becomes more important.
Let's take that argument then. Let's take it and say, okay, they didn't realize, but then later they did. So why, at that point, did they just say, oh, yeah, we got all that stuff over in a warehouse that's getting up to like 105 degrees during the day because there's no air conditioning on it, no climate control. It's deteriorating. Those are things that are valuable properties that we could release as home videos, or, there's now a market for this in the secondary nostalgia movie theater market. But you know what? We're not going to bother with that stuff anymore because... Why?
Because they're idiots.
They had this stuff, and they now knew that there was a market for it, and they still did nothing.
Yeah, no, they're idiots. But it's funny, we've swung so far the other way now that they would sell Cary Grant's toenails on the internet if they thought they could make money off of it. We've gone so far the other direction that it's just.
That's true. Anyway, so. as the story goes, hey, we've only been at this 40 minutes and we're still in the first scene.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
Oh, I apologize, everybody. This is going to be a long one, but just hang on. It's going to be a bumpy ride. To
have a sandwich. Use some Virginia mayo and make yourself a sandwich. Sorry.
Anyway, we see a crowd gathering as limos begin pulling up and the passengers are getting out. And we hear a presenter at the scene introducing Dorothy Lamour and Lloyd Nolan. And then, of course, Laura's voiceover continues. Some of the stars had helped the archives, and they were going to be recognized that evening with plaques of appreciation. And then another limo pulls up, and again, we hear the presenter at the scene saying, this time it's Virginia Mayo. And then the agency limo pulls up, and we hear the presenter at the scene ask, who's this? No, nobody important. And
and everybody leaves. That's my favorite. They get out of the limo and they all turn and just walk away.
Yeah. And this is going on as Laura is saying that due to her diligent PR efforts, she had gotten Mr. Steele selected as a presenter, but everybody's, exactly like you said, walking away. It's like, who are these guys? It does beg the question, though, how would he get selected as a presenter? I mean, he has, other than his own personal obsession with film, he has no connection to it.
No, and it's funny because they seem to become spokespeople for a lot of things. Saving the whales, saving the eagle, the, I don't know, blue speckled butterfly. Like, there's a lot of these events they go to where Steele is a known quantity, and I guess they want him there. But you're right, there's no connection aside from his fanboy obsessions that would. Who did she call? Whose agent? How did she? Yeah, it's a good question.
I guess the only thing that we could use to explain it, which they don't even mention in here, is that if the agency or the agency under, using Mr. Steele's name as a personal contribution, they made a huge contribution to the archives. And hey, we'll do this. Mr. Steele is a big fan of movies, and he would love to do a presenter, something like that. That's the only thing I can think of, but they don't mention that here. Anyway, next we see Steele on stage, giant movie poster reproductions hanging behind him as a backdrop, and he's standing behind a podium speaking. And for those who are interested, who didn't catch him, look closely at him. The posters are, from left to right, Road to Zanzibar, Dorothy Lamour, Somewhere in the Night, Lloyd Nolan, and Flaxie Martin, Virginia Mayo. And Steele, of course, is up there at the podium fanboying out.
Oh, he's in his element. This is like everything he's ever wanted.
Yes. And he's expounding in excruciating detail on the career of Virginia Mayo. And we can see from the crowd shots that, so what?
Yeah.
They're not that impressed. My question is, why is he introducing Virginia Mayo? Because Lloyd Nolan, as he later mentions, played a police officer in multiple movies. Why wouldn't he have been introducing Lloyd Nolan? Because that would be a more direct,
you would think
connection.
That would be and it's funny because I mean, this is his ultimate fantasy, the ability to talk at length about any movie star. Yes. And normally movie stars and the Hollywood types love being talked about and love being the center of attention, but they're all just sort of rolling their eyes like, get on with it, dude. This is taking forever. So it's quite funny because that's
I think you just saw one of our listeners rolling their eyes, didn't you? Saying, hurry up, get on with it.
Get on with it. Talk about the episode. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's true, actually.
Anyway, so Steele finally gets to the point of introducing Virginia Mayo as the honoree. And she steps to the podium, receives a kiss on the cheek from Steele and her plaque. And she pokes gentle fun at Steele, saying that she didn't know that she was so prolific. And then back into the future tense voiceover, Steele tells Mildred that, of course, his speech was a resounding triumph.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Whatever you say.
We see Steele and Mayo walk off the stage, and then backstage we see photos being taken, hugs being exchanged, and then we jump back to a scene where there's another presenter on the stage, and that this presenter is introducing Dorothy Lamour. And then we jump backstage again, where we see Steele still carrying Virginia Mayo's plaque, wandering somewhat aimlessly, finds a door marked private, and then, never being one to let a sign designating a room as private deter him, he opens the door and peeks in. And inside, he sees I'd say middle-aged man, probably, holding a blonde woman who seems a bit out of it in his arms. And sensing that he has intruded on a private moment, Steele apologizes, saying he hadn't seen the sign on the door that was right in front of his face at eye level as he opened the door.
I'm wondering, is this guy supposed to look like Tom Selleck's twin? Because that was my first thought was, oh, how did they get Tom Selleck for this? And then I realized it wasn't him, but my God, does it look like him?
You know, I've seen this guy in other shows before. I didn't look up his credits to get info on what specifically, but I've seen him in other shows before, like Murder, She Wrote and things like that.
Right.
I don't know if he was ever a big household name like Tom Selleck was. I don't think he probably was, but he's a
looks just
he's
like
a face
him.
I've seen. But yeah, you're right. He does have a bit of a Tom Selleck look to him. So I mean, that was the popular look back then. Brosnan kind of went against type. So anyway,
and I'm glad I'm not a fan of mustaches, to be fair. Hey, you've got your sweater thing. I've got my mustache thing.
Anyway, so Steele leaves, closing the door behind him, and then he bumps into Lloyd Nolan, and Steele asks Nolan if he's seen Virginia Mayo because he's still got her plaque. Nolan, who also takes the opportunity to kind of give it to Steele.
Yeah.
Says that she's out in the alley trying to catch her breath after all that hot air. I love the way he busts his chops all the way through this episode.
I think what makes it so enjoyable is that we're so used to characters falling all over themselves in front of Steele because he's supposedly this legendary private investigator. And not only does Nolan not do that when it comes to his fanboying, but he also busts his chops about how bad of a detective he is, which is hysterical because he sees right through him. Like there's no hero worship whatsoever. It's great.
Yeah. So anyway, somewhat chagrined, Steele gives Nolan a pained look, and Nolan says, "Hey, Steele, I'm only kidding." And he tells him that sure, he's got style, but he really should stick with the detective work. Steele heads out the door, then out into the alley where he finds Miss Mayo, and he reminds her that he still has her plaque. And she again teases him, saying that asking if she has to hear his speech all over again to get it back. He chuckles and then gushes, telling her that she still looks as lovely as she did in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Danny Kaye, Boris Karloff, RKO, and she cuts him off, saying that he flatters her before he can finish the annotation, which is RKO 1947.
Yeah.
And he asks her, what was it like to work with Boris Karloff? That's kind of, I guess it's probably an old joke, but you hear stories about people that go up to this Hollywood star and, oh, can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? Can you tell me about this other person over here?
Yeah. I think that too. That always clicks in my head because it's sort of like, on the one hand, that person's like, oh, they really want to talk to me because I'm famous, but oh no, they just want to hear about this other famous person that I worked with. And that's quite literally what I thought of. Not only that, but when he starts the annotation, I had a little bit of a cringe moment where I just sat there thinking she knows she was there. It's kind of like when a fanboy, approaches a star in a convention setting or something and is like, you remember in episode 42 when you did this and this and this? They're probably sitting there like, yeah, get on with it. Just I'll sign it. Just go. Right. So.
Well, the best example of that type of behavior was in the movie Galaxy Quest. I mean,
I love it. It's such a good movie.
Which has been called the best Star Trek movie ever.
Yeah, and I agree.
I think
100%.
I think it was either William Shatner or Patrick Stewart maybe that said that.
It wouldn't surprise me if it was Stewart, but Shatner in the later years of his life has come to have more of a sense of humor about it as well. But just, where are you going? To see if there's a pub. Like, it's such a great movie.
Yeah. So anyway, before Virginia Mayo can answer the question about Boris Karloff, headlights from a car suddenly illuminate them. There's a screech of tires from the far end of an alley, and a car comes ripping toward them. Steele shoves Miss Mayo out of the way and then dives into a nearby dumpster. The car tears past, and afterward, Miss Mayo runs over to the dumpster, peers inside, and then calls, "Mr. Steele! Mr. Steele!" And we hear the sound of Steele moaning. Well, as we see the event doctor treating Steele back inside, Laura's waving her purse to give Steele some fresh air, I guess. I don't know. Miss Mayo's looking on, and they're all standing around and looking at him, but they're blocking our view of Steele. And so we hear a voiceover of future Mildred saying, "So that's how you broke your arm and leg, eh, boss?" And Steele replies, "Well, not exactly." Well, the doctor moves out of the way, so then we see Steele with a small wrap around the tip of his right hand index finger.
This makes me think of my daughter. This is literally, no, she does. Like, that's an 8-year-old right there. You know, she'll get like a tiny paper cut on her finger, and we hear about it for the next week. My cut is hurting today. My cut is still there, Mommy. My cut, and I'm like, it's a paper cut, child. We don't have to amputate the finger. You're good, right? Yeah.
Or the kid that gets that paper cut and then they wrap their entire hand in a Band-Aid.
She demands, like, anytime there's the barest hint of a scrape, she wants a Band-Aid. And I've had to say, okay, the new rule is if you're not gushing blood, we don't need a Band-Aid. This is ridiculous. So, yeah, that's what I thought of. I thought of him going, there's a scrape, Laura. I need a Band-Aid.
Well, anyway, Steele brags that his safety was undoubtedly due to his cat-like reflexes.
Right.
And then the event doctor, taking the opportunity to deflate Steele slightly, points out that, well, you know, landing on a pile of discarded newspapers probably helped. And Laura gives a slightly caustic chuckle, and Steele gives a slightly unhappy chuckle. The doctor's pager goes off, causing the doctor to complain that he thought being the house doctor tonight would give him a relaxing evening, and he told his service to only call him in an emergency. And Steele...
Do events like this often have a house doctor? I mean, it's not exactly something that you would assume a medical emergency would take place at. I realize that emergencies can happen anywhere, but I would assume something like this would be necessary for, say, a sporting event where an injury could take place more likely. But this is an award ceremony. They're sitting in chairs and then they're going home.
I could make a smart aleck comment about Hollywood and the frequency of drug overdoses among the elite actors, but I won't.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. I that's a good question. I don't know. You know, it may be that it's a union thing. You know, we've got these things going on. We've got, I mean, if you listen to actors from some TV shows that have highly overhyped podcasts, they will talk about how they. What's that?
Ours is not overhyped.
No,
I'm just saying.
I said that have podcasts that are hosted by the actors.
Gotcha.
You know,
yeah.
And I won't mention one that had a trailer that they put out 2 years ago and only now just finally put out their first episode, and all they did for like the first 10 minutes was talk about the party they'd gone to the night before. Yeah, but you know. But hearing some of these actors talk about some of the safety meetings that they have on set for different things, some of them are pretty, seriously, you're going to have a safety meeting over that? Yeah, we got to have a safety meeting over that because it's a union rule. So I suppose it's possible that it's a union thing that, well, you've got these events. We've got people walking out and back from a podium. We've got these big backdrops. Something could fall and hurt somebody. I mean,
if they're working on a project, somebody gets hurt, then it's money lost to the studio. Kind of like how a lot of the times prior to when they finally allowed NHL players into the Olympics, they didn't want to do that because it would mean taking the players out of their normal team during regular season games, but also risking injury if they end up in the playoffs. So, yeah, sorry, there's a hockey reference. It's random, but all right, fair enough. I'll buy it.
Anyway, so the doctor asks Steele if he has a personal physician, and Steele casually looks over at Laura, who gives a slight shake of her head. Wait a second. All the times he's been bonked on the head and he doesn't have a personal physician, that might have been appropriate in season 1. You know, that and him having to ask Laura. But in season 3?
Well, I'll maintain as well, though, that Jeff Malvoine wrote Steele's Gold in season 1, and then I don't think he wrote anything in season 2. I could be wrong, but it seems like he's returned in season 3 as and he's written a couple of episodes, but both of the episodes that he's written that we've talked about have had us sort of saying, yeah, that feels a little bit like season 1 Steele. So
yeah, that's true.
I think that, although I do kind of like the gag because it's funny, not just on a Remington Steele level, but on just a general level, and pardon, I don't mean to offend here, but men are terrible at taking care of themselves. No. I'm saying men are terrible at taking care of themselves and seeing a doctor when they're supposed to. And my husband is no exception. Like, I have to force him to see it. So to me, it makes perfect sense that he doesn't even know if he has one, because that would be something you look at the wife like, do I have a doctor? Is that a thing that I have? Okay, cool. Right. So I just, to me that, but you're right. The amount of concussions he's had, you'd think the agency would have a physician that they use.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
It's not like they're both there's been a body cast. Wait, Laura was in a full, who are they? Again, insurance. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll have to grant you about, man,
not seeing a doctor when they should. Yeah.
Well, for a long time, I didn't have a personal physician. I would just, if I needed something, I'd go to the urgent care. And actually one time I went to the urgent care and, okay, I like this guy. He's all right. So I'll just make him my personal doctor. That didn't work out too well. Anyway, doctor gives Steele his business card and says that if he has any discomfort the next day to give him a call, and then he takes his leave. Laura begins to casually quiz Miss Mayo, asking if she's certain that there was no one who would be trying to harm her, no recent arguments with friends, creditors, nothing unusual. And hesitantly, she mentions that there has been something odd happening lately. She got a letter from someone saying that soon he was going to put her name in headlights in a most unusual way, with a similar letter arriving every few days saying something like the deadline is approaching, or other things to that effect. Steele, who's still putting himself together after his harrowing, life-threatening close call, murmurs, "The fan." And of course, Laura looks at Steele, and so does Miss Mayo, and she asks what it was that he said, and Steele says, Lauren Bacall, James Garner, Paramount, 1981. A deranged fan, feeling personally rejected by Bacall, attempts to kill her. And as he's saying, go ahead.
Interesting, because it's again another rare, fairly recent reference for them. Mm-hmm. But there's also, and it's not the same movie, but there was a movie in 1996 called The Fan as well, that was based on a novel from 1995. So definitely not a remake of that, but it's similar ideas that there was a baseball fan whose favorite team had just signed a contract with his favorite player. And he had like a restraining order. And then there's it's Wesley Snipes and Robert De Niro. But yeah, he's coming after. It's a baseball thing, but I wasn't sure if they were connected. So I just Googled it, and they are not, but
the same basic idea though.
Same idea. Yeah. Same idea. Like a deranged fan coming after in this case, it's a baseball star, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, as Steele is saying this to Miss Mayo, Laura, who even before he gets it out of his mouth, knows where he's going with this. She turns his head away with this, I can't believe he's really going to say that look on her face. And of course, Miss Mayo expresses understandable concern at his comments. And Laura, trying to gain control of the situation, explains that Mr. Steele's lack of tact is only due to this being his way of describing cases as, just kind of a way of him thinking out loud.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to think about how people are gonna. The deranged fan obsessed trying to kill her. Like, dude, maybe tone it down just a little. This is you don't want to terrify the poor woman. And Laura's just like, Laura, what my partner is idiotically trying to say is.
Yeah, Laura kind of goes a little bit too far the other way, saying that, this is his highly original way of talking about this, and perhaps meaning that the correspondent that Ms. Mayo had talked about was responsible for the evening's incident. Not using the word accident or anything like that. Oh, yeah. No, she does use the word accident. Sorry, my bad there. Misread my notes. She calls it an accident. Well, I mean, a car trying to run you down, that's not an accident.
No, and it happens to them pretty much every case they are on. Like, a car tried to run us down. It must be Tuesday. Like, this is not new for them. Maybe that's why she's
Tuesday, it must be Belgium.
Yeah. Maybe that's why she's kind of blasé about it, because it happens so often.
Can I throw that in as a movie reference?
Of course you can. That's a great movie.
It is. Yeah. I got to get a copy of that on DVD too. So yeah, that's on my list of movies to get. Anyway, so Laura tries a little bit of spin control by calling it an accident. Miss Mayo is concerned at the notion. Laura assures her that although it's a possibility, it's probably a bit far-fetched, but maybe they should take her home and have a look at those letters.
How is it far? I get that she's trying to reassure her, but
spin, 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 spin.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Miss Mayo asks Steele if in the movie that he referenced, they catch the culprit. And Laura tries to prompt Steele by nodding her head in the affirmative. But Steele, of course, isn't looking. And he begins to describe scenes of violence from the film. And the more Steele speaks, the more concerned Miss Mayo grows. And then, of course, Laura finally clears her throat conspicuously. Steele finally gets the hint, makes an embarrassed apologies, and then shuts up, finally.
Yeah.
And then we are at what purports to be the home of Virginia Mayo, except it's not. Anyway, I looked it up. Yeah, it's not.
I was going to say, how do you know? Have you stalked her?
No, actually, there were a couple of websites. There was a Blogspot blog, I guess you'd call it, yeah. And it documents the home of Miss Virginia Mayo that she had lived in for apparently a number of years. And I double-checked it on Google Maps, and yeah, it's not the same one.
Well, I guess it makes sense, because you wouldn't want to, aside from Laura's house that they apparently were fine with showing everybody where it was, you wouldn't want everyone to know where you lived and what it looked like inside, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that Stephanie's house that they used as Laura's, they didn't even actually identify where it was at.
No.
But, at the same time, Stephanie at that point in her career was not as big a name as Virginia Mayo was. So there was probably some other concerns there. But anyway, Laura and Miss Mayo are sitting with Steele standing behind them some distance, studying photos on the fireplace mantel and listening. Miss Mayo hands Laura one of the letters, and apparently it's the only one she saved, since Laura comments that at least one letter is better than none. Laura notes that the envelope was postmarked 4 days previously and has no return address. She pulls out the typed letter and reads, "Next week is almost here, a week you'll never forget. The week I come into your life." And the letter is hand-signed simply with the initials G-E-M. And Miss Mayo tells Laura that he signed all of his letters with just the initials. Steele, some distance away still, behind the women, says that he's getting an image of the character played by Peter Lorre in The Maltese Falcon.
This is the third reference that we've gotten this season to that film. They just keep coming
he loves
back
that
to
film.
it.
He loves that film. Now, the curious thing is Miss Mayo doesn't seem to be familiar with the movie.
Well, she's sort of familiar. She says, wasn't he a psychopath?
Yeah, but yeah, she's not enough familiar with the movie to know Peter Lorre's character was, in fact, a psychopath. She just, I think I remember, wasn't that it? Yeah. So I found that amusing.
Yeah.
Laura asks...
Well, I mean, I think we sometimes assume, too, that because they're in the movie business that they see every single movie that comes out, which I would think that would maybe be the opposite, that you wouldn't want to constantly be watching movies if you're always making them, that you might actually, I don't know, I think, and I'm not a movie star, so I can't really say, but I think if I, no, but I play one on TV. But I think if I were...
You play one in a podcast.
Yeah. I think if I were, though, I'd find myself watching movies and thinking about, well, how did they get that shot? Oh, that must have been a pain in the butt to block. Like, I'd probably have trouble turning off the professional side of it to enjoy just sitting and watching a movie. So
yeah, although I can see that with maybe some of the newer movies, but you'd think that an old classic like The Maltese Falcon, somebody who is in the industry would at least be more familiar with it than she seems to be.
Yeah, true.
But anyway, that's just my opinion. Laura asks Miss Mayo to excuse her for a moment, and she walks over to Steele and whispers to him that, as a rule, it's a good idea to avoid scaring the clients to death. And yes, his cinematic references are just meant to be inspiration, but Miss Mayo doesn't know that. So now she thinks she's being stalked by a creepy little man with buggy eyes and a nervous giggle.
This is a great line. This is a really great line.
Yes. And then Steele, looking at Miss Mayo, considers Laura's advice and says that, well, perhaps he should have mentioned Sidney Greenstreet instead. And, of course, Laura rolls her eyes and shakes her head because I'm not sure that that's much of a better reference.
Not so much, no.
So Laura returns to her seat with Miss Mayo and asks if there's anything else that she can tell them that might help. And Miss Mayo says that she's been chatting with Lloyd Nolan earlier in the evening, and he had mentioned he'd received some strange fan letters lately. And at the time, she hadn't given it a second thought, but now she wonders if maybe there's a connection. Laura says that they'll check it out the next day, then offers to stay a bit longer if it would make Miss Mayo feel any better. And she agrees, and Steele, unable to restrain his enthusiasm, says, "Virginia Mayo, Lloyd Nolan, this is the best case we've ever worked on." And
yeah, course, which is a little disturbing considering he seems positively gleeful that someone tried to, at least they think at the moment, at that point, someone tried to kill her. Like, yay, I'm so glad your life is in danger because I get to hang out with you. Okay.
Yeah, that's probably not the best interpretation of the situation.
No, it's not. It really isn't.
So next we see Steele driving the Auburn up an extended driveway to another impressive home, presumably also not the legitimate home of our next guest star.
Yeah.
And then we hear a voiceover with Mildred asking if protecting Miss Mayo was when Laura got hurt. And Laura cheerfully replies, no, the night was uneventful, though she and Miss Mayo had a wonderful time talking about the golden age of Hollywood. And Steele grumpily says that he didn't have time for such trivialities, claiming that Lloyd Nolan had greatly admired his little talk the evening before. It was natural for the two of them to, that they would get on well.
Somebody's jealous.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he might be able to have these conversations if he wasn't so overeager to gush over and to fanboy. Laura is not doing any of that, which isn't to say that she's not impressed with their body of work or doesn't think that they are talented actors. She probably does, but she's not salivating at the thought of hanging out at their house. So obviously they're gonna have a much more favorable impression of her than necessarily him, because he's kind of overdoing it just a little bit.
Yeah, really. Well, next we see Steele sitting on a couch, Mr. Nolan in the background gathering up a few envelopes, telling Steele that after he'd called, Mr. Nolan had made some inquiries and that Dorothy Lamour had also heard from that punk, as he describes the letter writer. And Steele is, as you say, inappropriately ecstatic. Dorothy Lamour, Road to Singapore, Moon over Burma, Typhoon.
Yeah.
And then, of course, getting hold of himself, he turns a little bit serious, commenting that he'd better see her about the situation as well.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. That's the only reason to do that, right? Yeah. Nolan hands the two letters that he'd saved to Steele, who reads, "You don't know me, but in 2 weeks you will, GEM, and 1 week until your life changes forever, GEM." Mr. Nolan states that he has no idea who GEM could be, and Steele says he will get his associate on it right away.
He's awfully comfortable with making those statements, and it's always funny when he does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Steele says he does have one more question. And then he says that he went to a revival house where they were showing Somewhere in the Night, but they lost the last reel. And I'm thinking, how do you lose a reel of film?
I wondered that too. Like, yeah. And if they lost the last reel, wouldn't they have known that it was missing before they started showing the film?
Yeah. I mean, when they get these things from the distribution companies, they all come together. It's not like, okay, we'll send you the first reel this week, and next week we'll send you the second reel.
Yeah,
you know, right? And if you don't see it by, say, the following Tuesday, let us know.
Did they have to give everybody their money back? Did they have somebody narrate how it ended? What? Yeah.
Anyway, Steele lays out the scenario of the film as it was at that point, where it so abruptly ended, and he says he's dying to know what happened at the end. You know, I would think that he could have found a copy of it somewhere on VHS or something, or late night TV. Anyway, Mr. Nolan chuckles, telling Steele that he's a strange bird for a dick. And then he ruefully comments that in that film he played Lieutenant Donald Kendall, and that somehow he seemed to rarely rise above lieutenant in those pictures. And as he's talking, Mr. Nolan notices out the window that the mailman has just passed. But that's funny because the mail came an hour earlier. Mr. Nolan lets it go and begins talking again, but Steele murmurs, 3 Days of the Condor. Mr. Nolan says, no, he wasn't in that.
Yeah.
Steele says that in 3 Days of the Condor, an assassin tries to kill Robert Redford, but he's disguised as a mailman. And, of course, Nolan doesn't quite follow, and he says, Robert Redford, disguised as a mailman? No, Steele tries to clarify, the assassin. Nolan shakes his head, telling Steele, you've lost me.
This is a really funny conversation, not just because they're confusing each other, but it kind of makes me think of a conversation with somebody who is a little older, who maybe isn't up on all the technology, and then you have certain things, and then just things get confused. Wait, you're doing what now? What's this thing again? And it just, it's great.
Well, you know, except that in this particular case, it's really Steele that isn't making much sense.
No, he isn't.
He's skipping and leaving out parts, and then he's saying things in a way that doesn't mean A or B, because it could be taken either way, and either way could be interpreted correctly that way. So, yeah, I mean, it's the typical fanboy thing.
Yep. Yep.
So, anyway, Steele leans over, puts his hand on Nolan's arm, pulling at it, and with an unexpected sense of urgency says, "Get down!" And suddenly there's a hail of gunfire tearing through the windows, destroying the contents of the room, piercing the walls behind where the two men are crouched on their hands and knees. And after several long seconds, the shooting stops. Steele starts to get up to survey the situation and damage, but Mr. Nolan grabs him, pulls him down, and reminds him that the postman always rings twice. And after a moment of confusion, Steele again dives to the floor as the gunfire resumes. Then after a few more seconds, the shooting stops. Now, believing that the postman only rings twice, not thrice, Steele almost immediately pops up, glances around to survey the damage, then runs out to try to catch the bearer of their special delivery. Not really a smart move.
No, you don't have a gun. Why would this baffles me? Why people would charge after somebody with a weapon when they don't have a weapon? What's it going to get you? Are you just stop right there? Oh yeah, okay, sure. Sorry, my bad. Here's my gun. Take me to jail. It's not going to happen.
Not going to happen. No.
Yeah.
Anyway, outside we see a masked postman. He's gone postal. Machine gun in hand.
I was waiting for at least one postal reference, and there it is. Which, for those of you who don't know the origins of that, wasn't it some like an actual postal worker shot up a post office because they just kind of lost their patience or lost their mind, whatever it was, and then it just sort of became a pop culture reference for anyone who just loses their crap. So,
and you know what's funny is that it was after that. A number of years, I remember I was in a post office and I saw a sign that said that it was illegal to, how was it? It was illegal to assault a postal worker in an unlawful manner, which of course led to the immediate question, well, then what is the lawful manner
What's
to
the
do
lawful
it?
way to assault a post office worker?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So anyway, we see the masked postman, machine gun in hand, lurking behind the shrubbery, and then the gunfire begins yet again, and Steele hides behind a pillar, questioning 3 times. Then, for some inexplicable reason, save to give us another joke and tease, Steele runs from behind the pillar that he's been using to shield himself and begins running across the lawn directly in front of the would-be killer.
Again, to do what? Tackle the man with the giant gun? It just...
No point other than to service the joke where he's running, bullets striking the ground behind him, and he runs straight for a swimming pool, and then we see him dive in. And then we see the masked postman do a Field of Dreams fade into the bushes, and Mr. Nolan comes out of the house, crosses the lawn, and then in a shot from inside the pool, which hints that perhaps the pool wasn't completely full of water, we see Mr. Nolan peer down, shake his head, and ruminate that he kept meaning to have that pool refilled.
Yeah.
Back in the present day, future, whatever. Back at the hospital, Steele is pouring out more champagne for everybody. Mildred is astounded, commenting that this must have been quite a fright to have a mailman try to drill him with a Tommy gun, and perhaps implying that it wouldn't have been so frightful if it had been some other weapon. Steele jokes that it does give a new meaning to the word special delivery. Laura mockingly says that, unfortunately, the attempt didn't affect Mr. Steele's sense of humor. Excited, Mildred realizes that diving into the empty pool must have been how Mr. Steele broke his arm and leg. Except, no, it's not.
I have some thoughts on this because that floaty that he's laying on is like this big. And the water that's in that pool, that empty pool, is a puddle, pretty much. Like, there's no way he would have come out of that unscathed without some major damage, because it's concrete. Like, he landed on concrete with that would have broken that little flotation thing that he landed on.
Popped it, yeah.
It would have popped, and he would have he definitely would have broken something. Like, yeah, I
had similar questions just a little bit further down in my notes.
Okay, well, so you and I are on the same page with this one.
Back in time, we see Mr. Nolan looking down, asking Steele if he's okay, and then we see Steele at the bottom of the pool, which, as you said, only has a small amount of water remaining in the bottom, but that he has somehow managed to land on an inflated body-length floaty, which is also at the bottom. And Steele says he's just a bit damp, but otherwise tip-top. And my note here was, I don't know much about pools like this, but would someone really empty a pool most of the way and only leave like a foot or two of water in the bottom? If you're going to do maintenance on it, I would think you would empty it completely.
Okay, so we have a pool in our apartment building, and I grew up with a pool in the backyard of our house, and my guess here is that it probably was drained to, like you said, maintenance, repair, something. Maybe there was a crack in the concrete. Maybe they had to get the liner replaced because there's no liner in it. That's just concrete. Whatever. But if it rains, and I realize it doesn't rain a lot in LA, but like if there's any precipitation or anything like that, that will gather at the bottom, right? So he says he kept meaning to fill it in. So I'm wondering how long it's been.
Well, see, I've addressed that in the next part of my notes here, because as I say, why would you leave just a foot or two of water in the bottom? And then why would you do that with a floaty left in there? And if the water was from rain, why would there be a floaty in there?
Well, yeah. The floaty I can't explain other than they needed it to explain how he didn't die. But I know, like, for example, our apartment just drained our pool for winter. They don't, so it depends on how you close up a pool. But in our case, here at the apartment, they don't close it. They just leave it for the winter, and then they fill it back up when it gets time to reopen the pool. With our one in the backyard, we would actually physically close the pool. Like we would drain it, but then we would put a cover over it and like make it and seal it. And then what would end up happening ultimately, because it's winter in Canada, is that snow would fall, the snow would melt, and that would actually push down on the cover, and you'd have like either ice on the top of the cover, or when it started to melt, you'd have like a layer of water there, right? Which obviously, as long as you don't walk on it, you're fine. But with like our apartment, it's empty, it's concrete. There is going to be water at the bottom, so there is sometimes like a foot or so of water. But yeah, why would the floaty be there? That I can't. I got nothing on that, because like I assume
the joke.
Maybe he was, like I said, if there's a crack in the concrete or something, you'd have to drain your pool and you'd have to fix that before you can refill it in. Yeah, the floaty
anyway,
makes sense.
Next, we see Laura is in the Rabbit pulling up in front of the Hollywood Center building, and we hear Laura in a voiceover telling Mildred that while Mr. Steele was having fun mingling with the stars, somebody had to get on with the nuts and bolts of the investigation, to which we hear Steele retort, "Having fun?" And then we hear Laura continue telling Mildred that although the fan letters were their only lead, even without a return address and signed only with initials, they still had a story to tell if one only knew how to read it. Then we see Laura with an older middle-aged man who we learn is named Morris. They're in an office, and Morris is looking over one of the letters, and Laura is looking over his shoulder. When she asks what he can tell her, he answers, "The typewriter is an Underwood 5. The machine used to type the letters has been well used. They can surmise that perhaps not well maintained, as the break of the capital T is dented. The left serif for the small y is gone, along with other distinguishing characteristics, sufficient to identify the actual machine. The stationery is unusual, heavy bond, Japanese manufacture, very handsome, very expensive, and only a few high-class stores in town would handle it. The brown ink used for the initials is also distinctive, an English brand, and he tells her that when she finds the store that handles both the paper and the ink, she's getting close to identifying their suspect." Morris hands Laura a list of the stores that she should visit, and she kisses his cheek, telling him to put it on our tab. And as she moves toward the door, Morris asks after her, "Does your boss ever do any legwork?" Laura pauses and then admits that Mr. Steele's skills are hard to define at times, Morris. Very hard. And she goes to the door, hesitates again, turns back, and adds, "Sometimes they're downright impossible to define."
I really enjoy this because, I mean, one, we know that Laura has to have these sorts of contacts in order to do their job. We know that she's got someone on the payroll at the DMV that sometimes runs plates, and
unofficially under the table.
That scientist that they went to in Steel Threads and whatnot. And we often get these little hints of their knowing one another. This guy's probably been around since before Mr. Steele actually appeared on the scene. And so he's probably never seen Mr. Steele come and do actual work for himself. Yeah. It's always been Laura. So this is quite funny because she's allowing herself to admit in confidence to one of her contacts that, sometimes we don't even know what he does here. But, hey, it's nice.
And I like the character. It's a very brief scene, a very brief interaction, but I like the character, like how it's presented. I would have liked to have seen more of Morris throughout the series.
Yeah, me too. It seems that there would have been
ample opportunity.
Because if he can identify stationery and typewriters, like they didn't have a lot of computer written communication aside from Mildred's transmissions from the dark prints.
Yes.
So this would be a primary form of letter writing at the time. So it would have been kind of fun if we'd seen more of him.
But, even with the transmissions from the dark prints, if somebody had printed out these letters on a computer, for example, you could and sent them to Lloyd Nolan and Virginia Mayo and Dorothy Lamour.
Yeah.
You could still use the letters to identify the specific printer. I mean, there are techniques for identifying these devices that are just absolutely amazing, and you can pinpoint it down to a specific printer.
And I mean, now, we've got stuff like being able to find the ISP address of the machine, right? So, that's less interesting. I think
ISP addresses are a little tricky because most internet service providers reuse those and cycle them so that if you reboot your modem, the IP address that you get may not be the same IP address that you had a previous time. And
Interesting.
I've been geolocated in Fairbanks. I've been geolocated in Juneau. We have gotten, it hasn't happened for quite a while, but in the past we had gotten local commercials on TV from businesses in like the Midwest.
Interesting.
And they were obviously intended to be local commercial shows.
Right,
I think it was on Hulu. But yeah, it's there's you got to be careful with these. But in terms of the physical devices, you can identify whether it's a dot matrix printer,
right,
a laser printer, inkjet printer. You can identify a specific machine that printed this based on how that machine puts sprays the ink on the paper or applies the toner or how the pins and the dot matrix hit it. Yeah.
You can also identify a millennial because they won't own a printer.
Yeah. Printer set.
We gave up our printers. We just go other places to print stuff.
Yeah.
Or we just leave it on our phones.
And cameras? No, you just carry all your pictures on your phone. You don't print them and put them on your wall. No, you don't do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, next we see Laura at Wessex and Sutton Stationers, and we hear her voiceover saying, "The third store on Morris's list paid off. The credit records produced a name, George Edward Mulch. The case was coming together." Then we see Steele approaching another large home as we hear his voiceover telling Mildred that at the time he was engaged in an utterly charming conversation with Dorothy Lamour. He had come to discuss with her the fan letters, but then claimed that the conversation quickly moved on to other subjects, which you find out it wasn't the case at all.
A loose retelling of the events, but sure.
Yeah. So loose that it bears virtually no semblance, no resemblance to it. Yeah. From the second floor, we see Miss Lamour calling out, asking who it is. Steele introduces himself simply as Remington Steele, to which...
The only question I have with this, and maybe not every movie star has this type of setup, but usually with LA and these big mansions and whatnot, you have to announce yourself at the gate before you can even get
they've
up
got
to
security.
The door.
Security
so
gates.
one would think she'd know who it was already, but I guess in order to make the gag work, I'm fine with it. I'm hand waving it because it is hilarious that she's like, yeah, we're good here.
Well, he introduces himself as Remington Steele, and she says, well, congratulations.
Yeah.
He expounds, telling her that he's the private detective that Lloyd Nolan had called her about, and she expresses disappointment, having hoped for someone more along the lines of a Tom Selleck type private detective. Well, look no
further than our murderer for the episode, because there you are, Dorothy.
Well, a look of dissatisfaction shows on Steele's face at the implied less than complimentary comparison. And after an awkward moments of silence, she points and tells him that the letters are over there by the door. And he asks her to stay put for a moment, jogs over to pick up the letters, then jogs back, and then asks if he can ask a few more questions as, background. And ignoring his implied request, she tells him, fire away.
Yeah.
He anxiously asks if that perhaps he could come inside, perhaps have a cup of tea. But Miss Lamour is not about to be moved by his friendly overtures, saying that there's no need. I can hear you from up here. Yeah,
this is funny because he's so desperate to get in and hang out with her, and she's just like, no, we're good. You're there. I'm here. Yeah. And it's quite amusing. I really like that she's just not giving him an inch at all.
Yeah. Well, and as bad as the conversation's been from this point, or up to this point, it continues to devolve.
Yeah, it deteriorates. He's making things worse for himself.
Yeah, he says, is it my imagination, Miss Lamour, or are you very nervous about something? She says, well, I am a little concerned about my life.
Yeah.
I see. Of course, the attempts on Miss Mayo and Mr. Nolan. Well, you're perfectly safe with me. Rest assured. Is that what you told?
The evidence would suggest otherwise.
Yeah,
both.
That's she references that. Is that what you told Lloyd in Virginia?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously they haven't figured out yet that he's the target, but the coincidence of it all, I would be the same. I would be like, you know what? You're bad luck, because both of these incidents you were around. So yeah, you're good there.
And he continues on. He says, Mrs. Lamour, if I could just talk to you for a bit, it might help bring the culprit to justice. And she comes back with, well, what are we doing now? Playing Trivial Pursuit?
Which is a Canadian invention. You're welcome.
Oh, yeah. You Canadians think you invented everything.
Hey, we invented Trivial Pursuit. So there.
But I just love Dorothy Lamour's character here. And
she's great.
She's just no guff, not putting up with it. This is the way it's going to be. And just put down after put down after put down.
Yeah.
And it's that last line that kind of changes the situation, because Steele gets this huge smile on his face. And with the sound of admiration in his voice, he says that, that marvelous saucy delivery of yours. No wonder Bing and Bob thought you were the perfect comedic counterpart. But, I think the critics overlooked your importance as a dramatic actress. And he goes and talks about it.
This is how you get them. This is how you get like any actor that's known for one thing.
Mm-hmm.
You make a comment about, well, yeah, but I think you were underestimated in this, right? And then immediately you're playing on their ego and they're putty in your hands. And this is what happens with her as well.
And then after he goes through the annotations and the discussion, that's what I have in my notes, is that having someone appreciate her dramatic acting skills did it. So she tells him to stay there. She'll be right down. She disappears from the window.
I'm not saying, I'm hoping that I didn't imply there that, anybody that does enjoy being complimented is egotistical or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that if you're an actor who is used to playing specific type of roles, when you play against type, it's nice to know people appreciate it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you can kind of understand it, because I would think that often, maybe not all the time, but often those other roles, the ones that are less talked about, are sometimes the roles that those actors thought were their better roles, the better character, the better film. And, they get, like Dorothy Lamour got all this attention for her participation in the road films. But here's Steele's complimenting her on something that gets less attention, that she might have thought was more, less frivolous, a more serious movie.
I had an experience like that with a convention I went to. I was Comic-Con. I'm a giant nerd, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the actresses there was in a film called New Waterford Girl, which is a Canadian film. And I had seen it in my film class, like one of my film classes when I was in university. The actress was Tara Spencer-Nairn, and she's known for other things, mainly things like, she was in a television show called Corner Gas, and she's been in a bunch of stuff. She's a Canadian actress, right? But she's got roles that she's better known for.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of a really obscure movie that had very little, almost nobody knows about it. And like I said, I saw it in a film class and I really, really liked it. It was set in Nova Scotia and it was direct to video. So it wasn't even, it wasn't direct to video. It was
almost.
I had like it was so obscure and so small, and it was her first film role. So I went with the DVD hoping to get her to sign it, because it's a really cute, sweet little independent film about a girl who is trying to get out of Nova Scotia. She's a teenage girl and she meets this American girl who Tara Spencer-Nairn plays, who's a boxer from New York, who their family is relocated there because her dad's in prison. And she goes around punching people, and the idea is that if you fall, you're guilty, and if you don't, you're not guilty. So it's a very weird little comedy. But when I went up to get her autograph and I mentioned New Waterford Girl, her eyes just lit up and she got so excited, and she was like, Lou Benzoa, which is her character's name. And she was just so like I had trouble getting away from the table. Like she got, what did you like best about it? You saw it in a film class? Really? What did they tell? Well, all these questions. And so I got her to sign a picture, and she wrote Lou, and she was just so grateful that somebody had seen the movie and had enjoyed and appreciated the movie. And so, I would think this would be similar with Dorothy Lamour.
in this particular case that you're describing, I would imagine part of it is that it was so little noticed, but yet for her, it was a very significant movie.
Yeah.
Not because it was a well-known, highly acclaimed, award-winning movie, but just because it was her first role.
Yeah, and a Canadian film. We have this weird relationship with cinema in that we hate our own cinema. I don't know why. It's bizarre because, like, if you get a movie that's Canadian, oftentimes if it gets a theatrical release at all, it'll be about a week and nobody will know it exists. So oftentimes you'll get really good Canadian actresses who do these films as a start and then move into American film because otherwise you're going to be stuck in movies that nobody's ever heard of forever. So yeah, it would have been her first role and probably was formative in that sense, but also the fact that somebody had seen it in Canada would be impressive. So, but yeah, it did have Andrew McCarthy, so it wasn't like it didn't have anybody in it. I mean, he was a name at the time, but yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, as Steele's waiting for Dorothy Lamour to come to the front door, suddenly Laura comes rolling up in the driveway in the Rabbit, honking the horn, trying to get Steele's attention. She gets out of the car, and he happily greets her by saying, "I see you couldn't resist meeting Our Lady of the Sarong." And Laura brushes his comment off, telling him some other time she's found the van. And
he's so disappointed.
I mean, it's just the whole change of attitude to his face. It's just like suddenly he's deflated. And after he realizes that she doesn't intend to let him linger, he gives her a very unenthusiastic, excellent work.
Yeah.
Well, Miss Lamour.
Their lives aren't in jeopardy for much longer. Crap.
Really? Miss Lamour arrives at the front door. Steele introduces Laura, then tells Miss Lamour that his colleague, busy little worker bee that she is, has just unearthed another clue which demands his immediate attention. So they will have to postpone their tete-a-tete. And as they're standing there talking, we see a car pull up beyond the fence, obscured by shrubbery. Laura happens to glance off in the direction to that side of the street, sees a rifle being pointed their direction out of the window of the car, grabs Steele and hollers, "Get down!" as she pulls him to the ground, and several shots are fired before the car speeds off, but nobody worried much about Dorothy Lamour. She had to take care of herself.
That's in my notes. Why did they just and the fact that she was so worried about her life being in jeopardy, and the second she comes down and opens the door, somebody shoots. Like, Steele's been standing there for a few minutes now. So, and those shots could have been, I guess maybe the person hadn't arrived yet, but it's just kind of funny that poor Dorothy, like, damn, that's bad luck.
So anyway, next we see the Rabbit traveling down city streets, and we hear another voiceover with Laura telling Mildred that the address of George Edward Mulch was in an office building in the heart of Old Hollywood, so they headed there immediately. Steele and Laura are concerned that they are going to be dealing with a highly disturbed personality, and it's a syndrome that has become too common, that when somebody suffers usually from schizophrenia or paranoid tendencies, they decide to become famous by killing someone famous. And when Steele expresses concern over what may occur when they confront their, as he puts it, murderous Mr. Mulch, Laura concurs, explaining that's why she stopped by the office before she came to get Mr. Steele. She then directs his attention to the glove box where he finds the office gun. Except,
just a addition to that statement about, like, paranoid individuals who want to become famous by killing someone famous made me think of John Lennon, because the killer, Mark something, I'm trying to remember his name. Anyway, Chapman. That's it. Yeah, shot him in his driveway, I believe, and then basically went and turned himself in and said, "I just shot John Lennon." And his entire reason for it was he wanted to be known as the guy that shot John Lennon.
I have an issue with their description of this, though, because they say usually someone suffering from schizophrenic or paranoid tendencies decides to become famous by killing someone famous, and that doesn't seem to line up. No, that's not a schizophrenic person.
No, because schizophrenia is hearing voices, hearing
Well,
Yeah.
here's what I found from the Department of Health for the state government of Victoria, Australia. Paranoia is the irrational and persistent feeling that people are out to get you, or that you are the subject of a persistent, intrusive attention by others. The three main types of paranoia include paranoid personality disorder, delusional, formerly known as paranoid disorder, and paranoid schizophrenia. Paranoid personality disorder, considered the mildest type. Most people with this personality disorder function well despite their mistrust of the world. Their attitudes and behaviors associated with this disorder, when they become obvious, are often discovered to have been present for much of the person's life. Delusional or paranoid disorder is characterized by the dominance of one delusion without any other signs of mental illness. The person's behavior depends on which delusion they have. For example, a person who has the delusion of persecution believes that other people are spying on them or plotting to harm them in some way. Stalking can be the result of a delusional paranoid disorder. For example, the person believes that they are in a relationship with a movie star they have never met, or in another case, a person may imagine they have a terrible illness despite repeated assurances from doctors. And then paranoid schizophrenia, which is considered the most severe type, is characterized by strange delusions, such as believing that one's thoughts are being broadcast over the radio. Hallucinations, especially bizarre ones, are also common with the condition. A person having paranoid schizophrenia often finds the world confusing and functions poorly without treatment. Now, based on that information and a few other things I saw, to me, it doesn't follow that a person with paranoid tendencies who kills someone famous is doing so in an effort to become famous. They're doing it because they believe they are protecting themselves, or they are doing it out of anger by their belief that maybe they've been rejected by this person who is the focus of their obsession, or other, what you might put in air quotes, rational reasons. But the whole idea that they do it to become famous as a result of this condition, that just doesn't fit. So I'm not sure where Laura got her information, but I think she's wrong.
I did look up because I was wondering, well, maybe I'm wrong about his reason, and it doesn't really say too much, but I looked up Mark David Chapman just because that was the immediate thought that I had in my head, because I had always heard that was why he went and he turned himself in. But it says here that he was a fan of the Beatles, infuriated by Lennon's lavish lifestyle and public statements, such as his remark about the band being more popular than Jesus, and the lyrics of two of his later songs, God and Imagine. And he apparently did have some delusions. He read The Catcher in the Rye, and he basically wanted to model his life after the protagonist. He also contemplated killing other public figures like David Bowie, Johnny Carson, Elizabeth Taylor, Paul McCartney, and Ronald Reagan. And apparently his legal team did try to mount an insanity defense based on mental health experts who said he was in a delusional psychotic state at the time of the shooting. However, his symptoms fell short of a schizophrenia diagnosis. So he, I guess, wanted to plead guilty, saying he had decided this was the will of God, but the judge deemed him competent to stand trial. So, yeah, I would think you would need a bit more than just, I want to be famous as a reason to kill somebody. And as you said, there are different types of schizophrenia and paranoid delusions and things like that. And I think the more usual or obvious assumption would be that if there was somebody after these stars, which we now know there isn't, or we find out later, is that, like you said, they feel rejected by them in some way, because Hollywood movie stars, musicians, all of these sort of famous people, the society encourages this parasocial relationship. We think we know them. We don't know them, but it's not hard to imagine that somebody who's mentally ill would take that to the next level and assume that watching these movies equals a relationship with this person. And the minute they do something that deviates from how they see them, well, they need to be punished, right? That logically makes sense in their heads. It doesn't make sense to the rest of the world, but yeah, that would be my usual assumption. So that's probably what you're thinking with Melch being.
Yeah. Rebecca Schaefer was an actress who was killed by a stalker who thought that he had a relationship with her, but again, he didn't kill her to become famous.
Yeah, I forgot about that. You're right. That was that's another example of.
Yeah. But he didn't do it to become famous. He did it because he was offended by her seeming lack of understanding about their relationship or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember the details.
Yeah.
But anyway, back into the episode, inside of the building that they go to, there's a series of small offices, and Laura and Steele find an office for GEM Productions Incorporated, George Edward Mulch, president. Steele hands Laura the gun and carefully unlocks the door. Wait a second. They didn't even knock on it to see if anybody was in there. Okay,
they've skipped over that part. They just let themselves
really
in.
again, they skipped over that part. But then they quickly enter the room, and I have to say, just quickly stepping into a room where a possible crazed killer could be.
Yeah.
This doesn't seem like a good idea, especially since the person with the gun is the second one in the room.
Well, I thought that's part of my notes. The other part of my notes is that it occurred to me that we rarely see Laura carry the gun. It's usually him sticking it down his pants. But in this case, she's at least holding it up, which is an improvement from potentially blowing off vital organs, at least. But you're right. Like, she should be, if she's got the weapon, she should go first.
Well, and they shouldn't just rush into the room in the way they did.
No,
it should be kind of like carefully planned in case there's somebody there that's going to be upset about their coming in.
Yeah.
Anyway, back inside, Laura hands the gun back to Steele, and they begin to look
which is
around.
Kind of weird. Like, why? She had it.
He's
she
got
brought
the pants.
it.
He's got the better fitting pants to put the gun down in.
We all know that women's clothing does not come with pockets, and so she's more. She's like, you know what? Blow off your bits, whatever.
Anyway, Laura spots an Underwood 5 typewriter on the desk, and in a filing cabinet drawer, Steele finds the paper and the ink. Just then, a somewhat overweight middle-aged man opens the door, steps in, sees Laura and Steele, and then with a panicked look on his face, turns and runs. The chase begins. Down the stairs, out the building, onto the street, down the Hollywood Walk of Fame sidewalk, across to Grauman's Chinese, through the handprint ceremony of a faux Burt Reynolds, stomping right through the wet cement.
Or Tom Selleck. But yeah, it was clear, it was meant to be Burt Reynolds. I mean, it obviously wasn't, but it was definitely meant to.
And they stomp right through the wet cement, and then through the theater gift shop, and then across another street. But as Steele completes his journey across the street behind their suspect, Laura, trailing behind him, runs out into the front of an oncoming car. The car, which looks suspiciously like the agency limo, screeches to a halt.
That suck for Fred. Like, if that were Fred driving. That's it. You're this Fred of the day is fired. We need a different Fred of the day. He's terrible.
Well, no, he stopped in time before he hit her, so maybe that's a good driver. Anyway, the car screeches to a halt, but in trying to get out of the way, Laura trips and falls into the next lane, and again, right into the path of yet another oncoming car. And this car again tries to come to a screeching halt as Steele yells for Laura, and then we're back in the hospital in the present/future, whatever you want to call it. And Mildred is certain that this is the answer. This is how they got their injuries.
No, because if Laura had gotten run over at top speed, she'd have more than just a neck brace. Her face would have been rearranged by the tires. She'd have Goodyear somewhere imprinted in her skin.
But no, she thinks that she got hurt being hit by a car on Hollywood Boulevard chasing a crazy fan. And as you say, Laura shakes her head, no, that's not it. And then we jump back in time or back into the past.
Now I want to back in time. Sorry.
Yeah. And we see the car stop just in time to avoid hitting Laura. And then the chase begins again. The man heads down a dead-end alley, so Laura and Steele finally catch up with him and grab him. Their suspect begins hollering, "Let me go. What did I do? You've got no right." And then, "Well, maybe you've caught me, but if you think I'm going to tell you anything, you got another thing coming." Steele tells the man that the three of them are going to go back to the man's office, and he can either go awake or asleep. His choice. We're back in the office of GEM Productions Incorporated. Mulch is sitting in a chair. Laura and Steele are hovering over him, peppering him with questions, accusations, and pronouncements, with Mulch responding, but not really saying much.
So before we get into anything else with Mulch, he appears a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
I know he's a fan favorite for some.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on Mulch? Do we like him? Do we not like him?
He's kind of a sleazy character, but I like George. I mean, in the same way that you've liked some of the villains.
Yeah. Okay.
You know,
I'm back and forth on Mulch.
Careful. You're going to get yourself in trouble.
I know.
Actually, no, this will be good. This will be good because now you'll be the one getting all beat up by the people in the Facebook group instead of me.
It's not a popular opinion. I know, but it's just, I don't know. Maybe it's just this episode. I know he's in other ones. But in this particular episode, this must have been one of those things where shut up. This must have been one of those things where they didn't know they were going to bring him back yet, because if they had known that this guy was going to be a repeat character, they were going to bring him back for other things.
Mm-hmm.
This role would. I ask myself, what's the point? What is the point of having this whole side plot with him doing the Virginia Mayo and wanting to create these products? Aside from being a red herring, it feels superfluous. So as maybe this is just because I'm looking back, having seen him appear in other episodes, and I know he does reappear, that my initial viewing might have been like, this is how they introduce Mulch? Like, this is stupid. He has like a bit part in the episode. It doesn't even impact the actual plot. They probably just thought they were writing a standard mystery where they needed a red herring. They needed something to divert from what the actual answer was. And in that case, he serves the purpose really well.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of introducing a repeat character we're going to see very often, or at least as often as it gets with this show, it was a bit of a letdown. But yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I think it's a good introduction to the character because it sets up the character for what he is. He's a guy that's always trying to figure out an angle. And worse than that, he's a guy that doesn't think through what his plans are. Yeah. And he's got these grandiose ideas that he can't execute. And it just turns into a jumbled mess. I think it's a good introduction to him. So
maybe I might have, I'm hoping my impression of him softens, but I know that the other episodes that I've seen him in, I've kind of rolled my eyes and go, oh, this is a Mulch episode. Okay. Which is maybe not fair. I know other people love him, and I want to love him. I'm going to try. I'll do my best.
Well, anyway, as I said, they're peppering him with questions, accusations, and pronouncements. Yeah, we know where you bought the stationery. So I bought some paper. Big deal. We can prove you wrote these letters on your typewriter. I don't know nothing about any letters. And he just, I don't know anything. I don't know what you're talking about. And Steele says, come on, George, we wouldn't have been here if we didn't have any proof. And he pulls out one of the letters and hands it to Mulch. And Mulch, defeated, admits, okay, I wrote the letters, but I didn't think anyone would catch on. And when they demand that they go with him, he jumps up and insists that they can make some sort of a deal. He says, I'll give you the Marilyn Monroe modern magic slicer. I'll keep the mayonnaise recipe. And Steele looks at Lawrence, got a sense of disbelief in his voice and on his face, and says, we're talking about murder, and this man's talking about mayonnaise. And Laura tries to explain the reality and gravity of the situation to Mulch, citing 3 counts of attempted murder, not to mention, and Mulch cuts her off, confused, not knowing what she's talking about. Steele hops in, stating that they are private investigators. He's Remington Steele, she's Laura. I can't recall Laura's last name.
This is bizarre. Like, how? What? Why? Why can't he remember her name? Like,
I don't know. It's silly.
It's silly, but it's also it doesn't make any sense. Like, I guess anybody can have a moment where they have a brain fart and they just can't remember.
You're talking to
what
the
king. It is. Yeah. King of brain farts on a t-shirt.
Right.
But I don't know. I guess maybe the joke just sort of sails by, that it feels like it doesn't belong there, because I don't know. The whole unnamed associate thing is usually quite funny, but this time it just kind of made me go, why doesn't he remember her name? What?
Well, when Steele introduces himself and Laura as detectives, Mulch is relieved. He says he was afraid they were with General Foods, Rand McNally, or Popeil. Now, do you understand the reference to Popeil?
No, I don't.
Okay. I figured that there was a chance you would and a chance that you wouldn't, and I figure there's some folks who, especially younger fans, aren't going to. Ron Popeil was marginally an inventor, promoter, and without a doubt, the king of late-night infomercials.
Oh, that makes sense.
He, one of his first inventions, some of his inventions include Mr. Microphone.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chop-O-Matic, Dial-O-Matic.
Okay. Yep.
And inside the eggshell scrambler, smokeless ashtray, pasta maker, something called GLH9, which was one of his earlier products, and a product that is still actually available from a company that bought out his company, the Showtime Rotisserie. Set it and forget it.
Oh, yeah. I know that one too. Okay, so I guess I do know who he is. I just didn't associate the name.
His company was called Ronco. It's from Ronco, and it really, really works.
Yeah, I remember that too. Okay. Yeah.
His GLH9 was hair in a spray can.
Okay.
Surprisingly, a wildly successful product. It was some sort of a powdered thing that you'd sprayed on your hair, and it built up these strands like a hair.
Huh.
And after you let it set for about, I think it was like 2 minutes, you hit it with a fixer or a sealant, let that set for 2 minutes, and then you could gently brush it like hair, and it would look like hair. And it was a wildly successful product. Oh, he also did the Pocket Fisherman. The Chop-O-Matic was one of his earlier products, and it was so. This is actually the product that probably got him into infomercials, because it was so efficient at chopping vegetables that it was impractical for salesmen to carry all the vegetables they needed in order to demonstrate it over the course of a day. So the solution was to tape the demonstration, and then once the demonstration had been taped, it was just a short step to broadcasting it as a commercial, and then eventually infomercials. But yeah, Ronco, it's from Ronco, and it really, really works. And yeah, set it and forget it.
It's funny because you can see infomercials as, you can see a direct through line between infomercials and, say, Amazon. Because the idea of being able to shop from your home, to dial a phone, give a credit card, and look, a couple days later, something arrives at your door. They didn't have the internet, so this was the way to do it. But yeah, I can definitely see the connection.
And then the intermediate step was home shopping networks type things, and then Amazon.
And then eventually.
But his slogan for the rotisserie, set it and forget it, was so popular that when the company that bought Ronco from him attempted to trademark it, they had to abandon it because it had become so popular in popular culture. They can no longer trademark it.
They can't use it because everyone's, that's funny.
Yeah. So that's the Popeil reference.
Okay.
So,
gotcha.
And I remember those commercials, man. I just,
I now that you're saying it, I remember some, at least, like, even just seeing the infomercials and late night TV and like that whole concept. So yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so Mulch still not understanding the turn of events, and Laura and Steele still not understanding the turn of events.
No, they're having two different conversations, and it's quite funny. Because neither one of them knows they're having two different conversations.
That's right. Laura tries to explain that they're tracking a killer, to which Mulch, also not quite understanding, exclaims, "That's wonderful." Oh, great. Yeah.
I'm off the hook. Yeah.
And he says he thought they were trying to steal his idea. And then with an attitude that seems to suggest that everything suddenly makes sense, he asks, who's dead? And Laura, still trying to make sense of the situation, explains that, well, no one's actually dead yet, but in the last 2 days, someone has made attempts on the stars that they'd mentioned, Virginia Mayo, Lloyd Nolan, and Dorothy Lamour. And Mulch says, ooh, that's bad. That's terrible. Now, he's not upset because somebody tried to kill him exactly. It's because they're desperate to throw off his campaign.
Well, yeah, because I mean, although I would think actually that it would, and this is going to sound really morbid, but if they died, it would help his campaign.
Well, not if you plan on having them be the spokespeople for their products.
But I just mean in terms of like the late great so-and-so buy this product. You can, yeah.
Well, Laura asks what campaign, and suddenly suspicious again, Mulch inquires, are you sure you don't work for General Foods? And of course, Steele grunts disapprovingly. And perhaps not completely convinced, Mulch begins to explain. He had knocked around the film biz for a long time, but recently he's been funneling all his energies into GEM Products Incorporated, calling it a free-flowing idea company, which Steele astutely surmises means that Mulch hasn't actually produced anything.
No, and doesn't really know what he's in business to do.
That's right. Well, it's like the there was a podcast put on by somebody who was supposedly a big name podcaster, and the purpose of the podcast was to sell the podcast. The podcast wasn't about anything except selling itself. It's like, have you heard the phrase "cart before the horse"? That's what you're doing there, lady. Anyway, Mulch admits that, okay, he hasn't produced anything, but then he gets excited as he tells them that about a month earlier, he had a dynamite idea, a line of products based on Hollywood stars. You want to make a sandwich? You reach for that bright, shiny bottle of Virginia Mayo. You want to go visit your Aunt Bernice in Chula Vista? But you need a map. You need Dorothy Lamour's Road to the United States Highway Directory and Restaurant Guide. And don't they get it? Dorothy Lamour, she was in all those road pictures with Hope and Crosby.
Is it
And at this point, I'm thinking,
that I think these things would actually sell really well. Like, people would buy this crap. It's kitschy enough that people would just be right. Especially now, I think the internet would actually help it more, because stuff like this would, I
Paul
think
Newman
actually
made a fortune.
Yeah, like Mulch, believe it or not, has a winner on his hands in terms of an idea. It's cheesy and it's silly, but
it would work. I mean, Billy Beer. Anybody remember that? But here's my question. Okay, I get the Mayo.
Yeah.
I get the map.
Yeah.
But the Marilyn Monroe Modern Magic Slicer?
Not sure I get that one either.
Yeah.
If somebody else who is maybe more familiar with Marilyn Monroe and her body of work and or personal life, reputation, knows how this would connect, please let us know, because I racked my brains on that one. The other two, they made sense, and they were just kitschy enough that I could see in my head the commercials for them. I could see.
People, are you sure you want to admit that out loud?
Well, maybe not, but I'm gonna do it, because I could see this selling. I could see people being like, "Oh yeah, I've got some Virginia Mayo." I was like, but the Marilyn Monroe thing, I would think more like maybe hair dye or something to that effect for Marilyn Monroe. I don't know.
Anyway, as Mulch is being swept away in the ecstasy of his idea, Laura and Steele are stunned, and Laura's look turns to pitiful bemusement, while Steele's look turns into
he looks like he was interested in that for a little. Like he kind of looked like he was considering it. Like I could see him having some Virginia Mayo in his cupboard.
Yeah, except he seems to get annoyed at the whole thing. Ultimately.
Yeah, eventually he does. But when he's first talking about it, there's a look on his face, and I don't know if maybe just Brosnan was amused at the actor selling it, but yeah.
Anyway, Steele wants to know why Mulch didn't identify himself in the letters, and Laura demands to know why the expense is stationary. And Mulch points out, and I think probably correctly, that famous people and actors as if the two are different things, I guess. They get offers every day. He was trying to create mystery, allure. The expensive stationery says that he's a class act. The mystery says that he's a master of hype.
Yeah, I mean, he's
really,
right to an extent. He's right in the sense that they do get offers all the time, and he is trying to set himself apart. Good idea. Sending these letters without any sort of context in them.
Not a good idea.
Not a good idea, because it was like one step away from clipping the letters out of a newspaper and looking like a ransom note. They were creepy. They were creepy letters, and so. Yeah.
Yes, they were.
Right idea, wrong execution.
Yes. So anyway, he says that the next week he was going to reveal all, and Laura asks if he can provide an alibi for himself for the previous 2 hours. And nonchalantly, he says not only can he account for his last 2 hours at his usual bar stool at Muzo and Frank's, he can account for his whereabouts every day for the last 2 years. And resigned, Laura rhetorically asks Steele, well, if Mulch isn't behind the attempted murders, then who is? Next, we're in the agency's office. Dorothy Lamour, Lloyd Nolan, and Virginia Mayo are there. Miss Lamour says that finding out who is behind the murder attempts is presumably what they are paying Steele to do. And Mr. Nolan is surprised, asking if they're really paying him, with an emphasis on the word him, almost as if the idea of paying Steele was specifically a problem. Miss Mayo says that the idea of paying Steele is news to her. Steele assures them that the agency services are on the house, calling it a privilege to serve such honored clientele. Mr. Nolan says, well, that's all well and good, but just exactly how does Steele plan to stop the psycho? Laura says that since the fan letters are a dead end, they need to discover some other common denominator between the three of them. Nolan compliments Steele for his clever thinking, even though he hasn't said anything clever at the moment. Steele assures him that it's all part of the deductive process that has made this agency what it is. And please, Miss Holt, carry on with my thesis. And all the while, we can see that Laura's jaw is taut with irritation at once, having, again, her contributions and guidance attributed to Steele. But she carries on, suggesting that perhaps the three of them have appeared in a picture together. And Lloyd Nolan and Dorothy Lamour are connected through the movies, St. Louis Blues and Johnny Apollo. And, of course, Steele supplies the appropriate annotations for each. But Virginia Mayo has not worked with the other two in any film. So Laura begins brainstorming. Are any of them related? Did they invest money with the same individual? Did they ever go out with the same people? Each possibility is met with a negative. And so she ponders that there's got to be something that they're overlooking. After all, in the previous 24 hours, they have each had someone make an attempt on their lives. So there has to be a connection. And of course, Mr. Nolan picks up on Laura's mention of the past 24 hours and says that there has been one new element introduced into the life of each of them during that time period. And Laura grasps at that, saying, what is that new element? And Mr. Nolan points at Steele and says, him. Miss Mayo concurs. Steele is taken aback. Me?
Yeah.
Miss Lamour makes it unanimous. You.
Poor guy. He's now got no reason to hang out with them. I mean, they stick around, but like it's just poor Steele's like, I don't think he's even as worried about the fact that someone's maybe after him. It's more like, oh.
Well, no, in the next scene, we see them walking down, Laura and Steele walking down the sidewalk, and Steele's complaining that the notion that he's somehow the target of a would-be killer is absurd, arguing that the fault isn't in ourselves, it's in our stars.
Yeah.
Great use of that line.
Yeah, but it's funny too, because how many people have they put away? Like, they've already had a mastermind psychotic killer in Des Moines come after them. So yeah, like this is not a leap of logic that is too far to make, frankly.
No, it's not. But he's convinced that it couldn't possibly be. So Laura points out that he was with each of them when there was the attempts made, and of course Steele dismisses her observation as rubbish. Laura asks if maybe it was an adversary from his old days. And again, Steele dismisses the idea. Something catches Laura's eye. It's a motorcyclist dressed entirely in blank, dressed entirely in black, riding slowly, holding a gun pointed at Steele. She hollers, grabs him, and shoves him down, and they dive completely to the ground, out of the line of fire, knocking over a magazine rack in the process.
I gotta say, I know that these guns aren't the most reliable. We've had discussions like this, but this guy's 0 for 3. He sucks. You know?
Yeah, but you know, the thing is, at least in this one, he's on a motorcycle. He's a moving target. True. And in the, well, both, I was going to say just the Dorothy Lamour, but even in the Lloyd Nolan, he was shooting at moving targets. And moving targets can be hard to hit. Now, and when you're moving too, like on a motorcycle, it just makes it that much harder.
If he were smart, though, he would just go into Steele's apartment, because we know that that's super easy to do, and shoot him in his sleep. Like,
climb up the balcony, in through the window. Climb up the balcony,
like everybody else. Don't think you're too good for this. Like, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone knows where he lives. Like, just go into the apartment.
Yeah. So anyway, next we see a scene from the movie Johnny Apollo with Lloyd Nolan and Dorothy Lamour playing on the television set. And then we pull back to see Laura watching the movie while Steele is on the phone with Daniel trying to come up with the name of anyone who might be targeting Steele.
I like this. I like that they found a way, because we only see Daniel. Daniel only appears in like 4 episodes, right? But
we got him in this one.
We got him in this one. And I like that they are connecting him back, even if, and this is one of those things where they're actually relying on the audience to know who Daniel is. Because it's not oh, you mean Daniel Chalmers, that guy who blah, 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 blah. This is thanks, Daniel, goodbye. And I guess it's one of those things where if you didn't know who Daniel was, you could just assume it's somebody he knows. But yeah, they're counting on audience recognition on this, and I like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I do also want to point out and direct your attention to the pin that I'm going to put into the movie Johnny Apollo on the television set.
Okay.
And that Laura is watching it.
Yeah.
Because I've got a point about that later.
Okay.
Anyway, Steele is on the phone with Daniel, and they're running through a list of possible suspects, culprits, would-be killers, including return engagement for the Palermo brothers.
Yep.
And yeah, they're not brothers, and they're not from Palermo.
We never
and
get any
Edward
explanation.
O'Shaughnessy, the Dublin Crusher. Now, we have encountered the Palermo brothers before, but I don't recall an Edward O'Shaughnessy as being a name that we've heard before.
No, I don't think it is. And I wonder if they had thrown that in there and thought maybe someday we'll do something with it, but just never got around to it.
Okay, fan fiction writers, sharpen your pencils.
There's your assignment for
go.
This week's fan fiction assignment, the Dublin Crusher. Who is he?
So anyway, the discussion with Daniel doesn't provide any possibilities because all of Steele's old adversaries are either deceased, incarcerated, or otherwise accounted for. Laura insists that he must be forgetting someone, and Steele doesn't take kindly to the implication, and gives her a very irritated look and asks just exactly how many enemies does she think he has. And Laura responds that she has great respect for his ability to generate animosity around the globe.
So, I mean, I know I said I'm tired of the bickering, but this is funny. So I'll allow it because, yeah, it's basically her way of saying, yeah, no, you're totally able to make everybody want to kill you. I fully think that you're capable of that.
Yeah. Well, he stops her as he turns off the movie that Laura was watching and switches the channel, saying that white heat is on. Well, Laura's astounded, asking, someone's trying to kill you and you're going to watch an old movie? Hello, McFly.
Well,
what was she just doing? Watching an old movie.
To be fair, there's not much she could do if he's on the phone trying to track stuff down and the TV's on. I mean...
She could be going through the list of enemies for her Remington Steele.
Yeah, well, she's
or their Remington Steele.
You're right, because he then goes on to point that out. But this is part of her tunnel vision. This is one of those elements of her character that we've talked about before, where she immediately assumes that his past is responsible for
All their
whatever
problems.
element has popped up. And sometimes she's right, but there's been times where she's not. And she has selective memory when it comes to that, for sure. Because, he's the one that points out, well, remember that one time that crazy psycho Descoin came after us? Yeah, that was your Remington Steele, not mine.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and that does come up in a minute because Steele says that, hey, watching this movie, it's therapeutic. I think better when I'm relaxed. And Laura carries on with her nagging, saying, need I mention Acapulco, Cannes, South America, Ireland? Well, of course, none of that goes over well with Steele. And as you said, he indignantly reminds her that the last time something like this happened, it was somebody after her Remington Steele. And she dismisses it, saying, yes, but Descoin's in prison. And yes, she checked.
But
Steele,
his daughter's not. And the daughter was just as much of a
psycho.
Like yeah.
Yeah.
Where's she? They don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, Steele fairly explodes in frustration and anger.
Somewhat justified.
And he argues that before he assumed the mantle, before he assumed the mantle of Remington Steele.
Yeah. Gotta say it like that.
Laura had managed to put quite a few people away who weren't even aware that Remington Steele didn't exist. He was just a shadow man, a person who was a figment of paper and her imagination for the sole purpose of drumming up business. And as a result, there could be any number of ill-tempered people out there who'd like to perforate him for her previous efforts.
I like the word perforate. Like, that's a good visual there.
Well, as he's venting, Laura gets a rather put-out look on her face, as if she's thinking that he's making a mountain out of a molehill. And as soon as he's done, I apologize. I'm not sure whether he's really sincere when he says I apologize, because it's kind of one of those, okay, fine, I'm gonna cover my backside and claim to apologize before I get in trouble. So I don't know.
I think that there's probably some level of sincerity there. He is jumpy, and she's I think he kind of means it, but I'm going to derail this for just a second because we talk about Laura's wardrobe a lot and what she does or does not look good in, and you get crucified for your clothing opinions. I really like it when Steele doesn't wear suits, where he's dressed in something that is not a suit. Not because I don't like suits. I know there's a lot of women that are super into a guy in a suit and tie and whatever else, but for me, I find them really boring because there's not really a lot you can do with them. I mean, I know that you can get different cuts in the jacket and different colors in the shirt and tie and whatever else, but to me, the look of a suit is fairly the same. And when you wear it every day, it's not something special. It's something routine, right? It's different if you get dressed up for something you put on a suit. So when he's dressed in something casual, I enjoy seeing that. It looks good. He looks really good in red. The deep red shirt that he's wearing here really works for him. Like, it's a good solid color that kind of just brings out eye color and everything else. So I'm going to give a big thumbs up to that red shirt.
Okay. For me, it was hard to see what color the shirt was. It was dark enough that on my display, it was hard to make that out. But anyway,
it's a nice, like, deep red color. It's good.
Which is, from what I can see, I can kind of imagine that color, and that's one of my pet colors. I for whatever reason, I have this thing for red, especially a dark red.
No, it's actually psychologically, it is a color that is found to be something that visually we are attracted to, both men, women, anything in between. Like, it's like a primal signal that it sends to our brains. Right?
Well, if I've got a choice of like in cars or motorcycles or pens or anything like that, if I got a choice of colors to choose from, cables, I'm going to get red.
Yeah, and even with things like supermarkets or stores, oftentimes they will decorate in reds because they tend to make people spend more time in the store. Yeah.
Okay.
There's like a psychological motivation behind it. So, yeah.
Anyway, after Steele apologizes, Laura, apparently realizing that she's also a bit tense and that maybe she's having a bit of an attitude about Steele's past and that isn't helping, she visibly softens her attitude and admits that, okay, the case has her jumpy too.
This is nice that they both have kind of are able to be like, yeah, you know what? We're both on edge. We're just going to chill.
Yeah.
We don't get to see that a lot.
Yeah. Steele acknowledges that, it's understandable because when somebody's trying to kill you, it's kind of nice to know who and why.
Right? I mean, common courtesy. God.
Yeah. Well, Laura smiles and assures him that she won't let anyone hurt Remington Steele, yours, mine, or ours, which is almost another movie reference. Kind of.
Yeah.
Well, I think she says yours or mine. I threw in the or ours because that makes it the movie reference with 1979's Henry Fonda and Lucille Ball.
Right.
Anyway, she leans over, kisses Steele on the cheek, and then he moves to put his arm around her and pulls her toward him, and
He's
begin to kiss.
taking advantage of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I will say this is a really nice statement for Laura to make because she doesn't often, a lot of the time when he's physically attacked or threatened or he comes back and he's got like a bump on his head, she's not always compassionate towards him. Sometimes she's dismissive. Oh, you're fine, whatever. But here she says, no, I'm not going to let anybody hurt you, that's really sweet. I like that.
Yeah. So let's see, where was I here?
He was taking advantage of that kiss.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, yes. They begin to kiss. Nobody starts shooting at them, but Steele does become distracted, and he stops kissing her as he is hearing and seeing something on the TV that has captured his attention. A news announcer is reporting the death of wealthy socialite Yvette Harwood, found in her Malibu home the previous night, dead of an apparent heart attack. Steele gets up, moves closer to the television for a closer look, and at the end of the announcement, he turns the set off, turns to Laura, and says in a puzzled tone, I know that woman. And, of course, Laura's surprised. It takes Steele a moment, but then it clicks. Backstage at the dedication ceremonies, he went looking for Virginia Mayo, went in the wrong door and saw that woman embracing some man. But now as he recalls it, it does seem a bit odd that she really wasn't dressed for the ceremonies, and come to think of it, she wasn't very lively either. Laura doesn't quite follow, and Steele isn't quite sure what he means either, pondering the memory, and he recounts that at first he thought she was relaxed, but her head and her arm seemed limp.
This is an interesting, I'll admit there was a part of me when I watched the episode where he opens the door, he sees them, and I'm sitting there going, how does he not see that she's unconscious? That there's something wrong here. But then when I thought about it, I really thought about it for a second. I thought, well, first of all, he thinks he's walked in on a private moment. It's common human behavior if you think you're seeing something you shouldn't be seeing to look away or to, oh God, sorry about that. Like if you see somebody naked or whatever, right? So he thought he was walking in on something intimate, probably just immediately brushed away any of the other details of it, because he even says here, I just thought she looked relaxed, like they were hugging. But also, and I don't know if I'm right about this, I might be completely off, but when it comes to stuff like this, girls, when they start going out to bars, they are told from day one, don't let anybody tamper with your drink, stay together, don't let anyone go home with somebody, and we kind of look out for one another. So when we see somebody who's maybe not conscious at a bar, like I remember I was out with my friends one night, and we were sitting there and we saw a guy and a girl at a table, and she was basically like, her eyes were shut and he was kissing her and stuff like that. And we went and we said to the bouncer, like, hey, I know that you can't do anything without knowing whether they came together or whatever, but this doesn't feel right. She's not she's not conscious. Like we didn't know if they came in together, if he'd put something in her drink. Like there's no way to know that, right? So for me, seeing that sight, it's an immediate, oh, this is not good. But for Steele, who maybe wouldn't necessarily have that in the back of his mind, I can see how he would have just dismissed it, and only there, when he sees the story on TV, going, wait a minute, what did I see? Let's go back. So, yeah, this is well done, I think.
Well, not only that, but I mean, let's face it, at these kinds of events that we're talking about, this award ceremony, there's usually a fair amount of alcohol.
Yep, true.
That's getting ingested. And I would say it's probably not unheard of for somebody to over imbibe and get to the point where they are just, somebody has to literally hold them up. So it could just be that he also assumed that that was the case in this particular situation.
True, yeah. It doesn't automatically mean somebody has hurt her.
Yeah, it's not automatically a sinister situation.
Yeah, it could be someone's helping her. Yeah. Yeah, so I do think this was well done. My immediate reaction was like, how does he not see that something's wrong here? And then I had to go, no. Put myself in his perspective. It could be a bunch of things. So.
Well, I mean, something wrong could cover a lot of things, many of which are not sinister. They're just, like I said, somebody overindulged.
Yeah.
But as he's thinking about it, the dots suddenly connect in his mind. And he says, it was right after he saw them that this first attempt on his life happened. And Laura asks if the man saw Steele, and Steele says, yes, tall, good-looking fellow, mustache, like one of your American football players. And Laura realizes that Steele may have just described a murderer, and that when he saw Yvette Harwood in the backstage room at the ceremony, she may have already been dead and not from a heart attack. And, of course, Steele recognizes that if that were the case, then the man would definitely want to get rid of him. The question, of course, is, who is he? There's a brief scene of Laura, Steele, and Mildred in the hospital, with Mildred realizing that this was what it was all about, but wondering how they had figured out who it was. Then we return to our ever-present past. Paul McCartney fans, take note there.
Oh, sorry. My brain just... Well, okay. Gotcha. Yep. But I'm bumped.
Do music videos count for our movie list?
Oh, anyway, God, I hope not. It's long enough as it is.
We're back in Steele's apartment, and we hear Steele's voice over telling Mildred that the room was ablaze with ideas, except, of course, that we see that they have absolutely no ideas at all. And every time they think they have something, they realize they don't. Yeah. Even before they say it, they don't. Yeah. So Steele continues telling Mildred that despite all their supposed ideas, they didn't have a chance to act upon them. And then, of course, in the present past, we hear a door buzzer sound. Laura and Steele look at each other as if, like, well, what do we do now?
Well, I don't know why they look so worried. If it was a bad guy, they wouldn't ring the bell. They'd just come in. Like,
well, there you go thinking again.
Yeah.
Anyway, so neither one of them moves. And then after a moment, Laura kind of gives them a gesture as if to say, well, are you going to answer it? And then Steele, rather than going to the door, calls out, who is it? And it's Lloyd Nolan.
It's the murderer. Like, what does he think is going to happen? I've come to kill you. Could you please open the door?
Shark. What was that from? I don't remember. Anyway, it's Lloyd Nolan. Laura and Steele rush over to the door to let him in. And then after some polite greetings, including an apology for intruding at home, Nolan tells Steele that since Steele has chosen to put his life on the line for Mr. Nolan, no matter the fact that Mr. Nolan seems to think that it's Steele, not himself, who's the issue, he's decided to do Steele a favor. He introduces Julian, his cousin's youngster.
The guy is a giant. He's like 6'5" or something like that. He's huge. Yeah. And what is it with this trend of older films and movies and stuff putting really tall dudes in striped shirts? Have you noticed that? It's a thing.
I guess it makes them look shorter, maybe. I don't know.
I don't think it makes them look shorter. I think it makes them look kind of younger, like a little boy in a striped T-shirt. But yeah, like this
Dennis the Menace type shirt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's a monster. He's huge.
Well, yeah, he's a powerful looking youngster, probably a college football player. Looks from the looks of him, he's tall, muscular, as you said, and
Like, Brosnan is not a short man. This guy towers over him. I think Pierce Brosnan's like 6'1", and this guy is looking down at him.
Yeah.
So.
Although he doesn't exactly strike me as a rocket scientist. But anyway.
No, he's... Yeah.
Mr. Nolan continues, disparagingly commenting that having seen Steele at work, it's obvious he needs some muscle. And then, trying to soften the criticism somewhat, he clarifies, saying that he doesn't mean any disrespect, but let's face it, Dirty Harry he ain't.
Ouch. Ouch.
Oh, that's another movie reference I missed.
The list just gets longer and longer. It's not exactly a short list for movies in this episode.
Yeah. Okay, I have to add that to the list even as we're talking, folks. There we go. Dirty Harry. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. Dirty Harry, you ain't. Of course, Steele, somewhat offended at first, takes it all in good stride. And then the phone rings while Steele continues to entertain at the door. Laura goes to answer the phone. She's silent for a few moments and then says, "Stay right there. Don't worry. We'll be right over." Laura rushes to the door, explaining to Steele that was Virginia Mayo on the phone, and it was about Yvette Harwood, and she'll explain in the car. Steele stops, apologizing to Mr. Nolan, saying, "Thanks for your offer, but this Harwood matter, the attempt on my life and everything like that." And Nolan interrupts, telling Steele to stop talking and move.
Yeah.
Laura chimes in agreement, and as they're walking out, Mr. Nolan asks Laura, "Is he always that talky? Yakety, yakety, yak." I love this character that he's playing.
It's great. It's really funny. I like the fact that Steele so desperately wants to be in their orbit, in these stars' orbit, and he doesn't seem to mind the fact that they don't take him seriously, that they kind of see him as a bit of a buffoon. He's just happy that they're mentioning him.
I see it differently. I think you're part right. He wants to be in their orbit. He wants to be accepted by them, but he's getting annoyed that Lloyd Nolan just views him not with contempt, but just as a pathetic excuse as a detective.
Yeah,
Anyway, next we're at the home of Virginia Mayo, and we hear Laura in a voiceover explaining that Miss Mayo and Dorothy Lamour had known Yvette Harwood through her involvement in the Hollywood community, and when they learned of her death, they were very concerned. And we see Laura, Steele, and our trio of Hollywood stars, and Julian sitting around an oversized coffee table. Miss Mayo and Miss Lamour explained that Yvette Harwood was vulnerable, sweet, but not too bright. After she had been widowed, she became easy pickings for every louse in town, and her latest affair was a disaster. The guy was using her, but although she didn't see it, she was apparently thinking of dropping the guy because she had changed, had become very depressed, and even had trouble getting out of bed. Steele addresses Virginia Mayo, saying, "You told Miss Holt on the phone that you thought Yvette was in some kind of trouble." And Nolan, clearly getting irritated at Steele's roundabout manner, just hits him in the chops again and says, "Make it a question, Steele. Short and direct." He turns to Virginia Mayo and says, "Jenny, why did you think Yvette was in trouble?"
Yeah.
I love this guy. I love him. She admits that it was more intuition than anything specific. And at that, Nolan looks at Steele and they exchange gestures which say, "Well, that was pointless."
Yep.
Miss Lamour gives the fact that intuition was saying that when they heard Yvette Harwood had supposedly died of a heart attack, they knew something was wrong because Yvette was a health nut, ate all the right foods, ran 5 miles a day on the beach, did the Jane Fonda workout tape, never had a sick day in her life. No one will ever convince them that she died of a heart attack. I do have to take exception to that. And I just, as I was saying that just now, it came to me. I need to check the dates. Yes, it would have been, let's see, July 20, 1984. And this episode, what did I say it was? It was December 4th, 1984. Okay. There's a guy named Jim Fix.
Yep. I was just thinking that.
Proof that doing all the right things
doesn't always
might
work.
actually kill you, because Jim Fixx was the guy that got the jogging craze started, and he died of a heart attack. And it happened in July of 1984, before this episode was written and aired. So this alone is proof that Laura's off base here.
Dennis Leary actually did a rant on it in one of his comedy specials, his stand-up. If you've ever heard his No Cure for Cancer, this is how I heard about it, because I was 2 in 1984. But yeah, he's doing this whole rant about because how he likes to smoke and eat red meat and all the, because he does a whole bit about how they no longer allow smoking on airplanes. He's like, "Are you happy? You own the plane." And I'll eliminate the F words here from the rant, but he says, like, "I can guarantee you that if the plane ever goes down, the first thing you're going to hear is, 'This is your captain speaking. Light them up because we're going down.'" He's like, "I got a packet of Camel non-filters. I'll see you in the bottom." And then he says, "Remember Jim Fixx, famous jogging guy, did a jogging book, did a jogging video, and dropped out of a massive heart attack when he was jogging. That's when." So yeah. That's how I knew about it. Yeah.
So, yeah. In fact, I did a lookup on heart attacks actually as well. And it says that a person who looks healthy could have been living with some blockages in an artery for a long time, and that this could lead to a sudden cardiac arrest. Heart attack occurs when there's a blockage in an artery leading to the heart, which reduces the blood flow and therefore the oxygen to the heart muscle. 8 out of 10 times, the cause of cardiac arrest is a blockage of the heart. For 20% of the cases, there would be a different reason, such as a clot in the lungs, which stops the oxygen supply to the heart, sudden bleeding in the brain, wherein all body mechanisms, including the heart, stop functioning, intake of toxic drugs in huge amounts that can stop the heart's functioning abruptly, a viral infection that leads to cardiomyopathy, which is an irregular signal generated from the undetected weak heart muscle, or congenital heart defects that have gone undetected. So there's a lot of reasons.
Yeah,
why...
and I was going to say that because my daughter, when she was 14 months old, she had this. I am a severe asthmatic and have been for my whole life, and spent my childhood in and out of hospital from life-threatening asthma attacks. And my daughter doesn't have ever-present asthma, but she had this habit of anytime she got sick before the age of 2, any cold, anything like that, it would turn into pneumonia. And that was very unusual because colds don't usually turn into pneumonia in healthy children, right? But she had this one cold when she was 14 months old that turned into pneumonia, and we had to go to the hospital. And it was one of those things where the waiting room was packed, and I thought, great, we're going to be sitting here for hours. And they took her and did triage, and they checked her oxygen level, and they took us immediately into the room. And that's never good, because that means that your kid is bad enough that you get to bypass the line, right? And so we went and we got a bed, and they give her the steroids and whatever else. But we went home. They determined that she was healthy enough to go home that night, and we went home, and the next day I'm at work and I get a call from the ER doctor. And because they do a chest x-ray, right? They do that it's really funny, by the way, if you've ever seen a baby in a chest x-ray, they put them in this like pickle jar because they have to get them to sit still. So they put them in this tube, and their arms are up like this and their faces are smushed. And if it wasn't so traumatic, it'd be hilarious. Because if you look up babies and getting chest x-rays, they're like... It's not good, but so she got the pickle jar x-ray, and the ER doctor called me back. Also never a good sign.
Probably not, no.
Right? And he said, yeah, there was a problem with her heart. And like, I'll never forget that moment. It was the most terrifying moment in my life. Like, I called my husband, we rushed back to the hospital, they did tests, and they basically found that the pneumonia, the virus, had caused her heart to swell. And there wasn't much they could do except say, like, well, it should go back down. I was like, should? Oh, good. That's a wonderful thing you want to hear when they're talking about your child's heart. But like, yeah, like this is a kid that has no known issues. And yeah, so heart attacks it wasn't a heart attack, but
yeah,
you can do all the right things and still end up,
yeah. So there's a lot of wild assumptions being thrown out around here with regard to Yvette Harwood and her health, and they aren't supported by medical.
No, but for the purpose of the script, we have to get from A to B to C. So,
Yes, right. So anyway, Next, we see that everybody is crowded into the limo. Steele, Laura, and Virginia Mayo,
so
along with
funny.
Julian, are in the back seat. Julian, would you mind moving your bicep a tad to the left?
This is the best part because this man is a mountain. Like, why didn't they take 2 cars?
And Lloyd Nolan, Dorothy Lamour, and yet another temporary Fred are in the front seat.
Fred for a day.
Mm-hmm.
It actually makes me think of the show Gilmore Girls. If anyone's ever seen this, it became a running joke that Emily Gilmore, the grandmother, she's super rich, and every time they go for dinner, she's got a different maid because she keeps firing them. So this kind of made me think of like maybe they're just firing all the Freds, like.
Or like the drummers in Spinal Tap.
Yeah, they keep exploding. Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, Nolan calls from the front seat back to Steele in the back seat, asking what kind of artillery he's packing. And Laura replies that the gun is back at the office.
Of course it is.
Nolan shakes his head in amazement. I don't know how you made it this far, Steele.
Same.
Then
when
we are at...
When he remembers to bring the gun, he's sticking it down his pants. So, yeah.
Well, then we're at the front door of the Yvette Harwood house. Steele is trying and largely failing to pick the lock as Nolan, who's clearly unimpressed with Steele and is becoming more so as the case progresses.
It's great.
He looks at his watch and critiques, awfully slow, Steele.
Steele's having performance anxiety. He calls it stage fright, but let's call it what it is. I mean, he's got Nolan looking over his shoulder and suddenly yeah.
Yeah. Except that performance anxiety could be misinterpreted. Anyway, Steele finally manages to unlock the door and the entire troop enters. Inside, in the bedroom, Laura and Steele begin searching. Steele heads straight for a large picture hanging on the wall. Lloyd Nolan asks Steele what he thinks he's doing. Steele replies that he's looking for a safe that might contain something relevant, like papers, documents, diaries. Nolan dismissively tells Steele to keep up with the times. All safes went out with vaudeville. And he presses on the front of a cube-shaped wicker end table, and the front pops open and revealing a safe inside.
I have a couple of comments about this. One,
okay.
They've encountered lots of wall safes on this show so far. So Nolan's categorically wrong about that one. Two, the safe would have to be in the wicker, right? Because the wicker would not be a very good safe. You could easily break that. So I'm assuming it's like a metal thing inside the wicker table.
I think it's the wicker is just is a piece of furniture that they put the safe in to hide it.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, wall safes really hadn't gone out of style, but Nolan just can't let Steele.
the what's his face used a wall safe in My Fair Steel. Like they've come across a few wall safes, but Nolan is he's just enjoying busting his balls at this point.
Well, Steele tries to recover some sense of dignity by saying, well, that was going to be his next choice. And Laura, who had gone into the master bath, comes back with a medicine bottle that she indicates contains medication prescribed for depression. Mr. Nolan comments that at least somebody's on the ball.
It's bad when Laura's getting the credit for her good ideas.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Steele is still struggling with the safe. The handle's a bit stiff. Mr. Nolan directs Julian over to take care of the problem, and he politely moves in, calling Mr. Steele, sir. He bends down, grabs the handle and twists it right off the front of the safe.
Yeah, this is the equivalent of Mr. Steele, like having a jar of orange juice or something that he can't open and say, can you help me here? Like he's a bit of a damsel. It's quite cute.
Well, Julian stands up, hands the handle to Steele, and Steele, taking it, quietly says, thanks to Julian, who again makes Steele feel old and outdated by answering him, you're welcome, sir. Yes. Laura grins at Steele's embarrassment.
She's enjoying this.
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
She's thoroughly enjoying this. I think she has a right to, though, for all the times where he's been gushed over and she's been ignored. This one, she can have this one.
Yeah. Steele bends down and begins pulling out the contents of the safe, handing items to various people. Dorothy Lamour opens up a jewelry case that Steele had handed her and exclaims that there's something odd about it. Most of Yvette's jewelry's gone. When Mr. Nolan suggests that it could be in a safe deposit box, Miss Mayo says no. She liked to keep it around. Laura, looking over some of the documents that Steele had handed her, reads that most of it had apparently been sold off, with accounts showing deposits from those sales. Except that her account balances are down to almost nothing, and that for the past few months, she's written big checks to something called Templeton Enterprises. And at the name Virginia Mayo, without even thinking or a moment's hesitation, just kind of blurts out, "That heel." And then she explains. Ernest Templeton calls himself a producer, but is really nothing more than a fast-talking con man. Most of his projects never come to the screen, but he always manages to walk away with a fistful of dough. Fistful of dollars. Almost a movie reference there.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a second. I should look that up in the transcript.
Dirty Harry?
See,
Yeah.
fist. No, not first. Fist. Fistful of, yeah. Okay, they missed an opportunity to make a movie reference there.
They did.
Oh, come on. Somebody should have been more on the ball there. Come on. Missed it. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes, fistful of dollars. Dorothy Lamour seconds the attitude toward Templeton, saying that he had the gall to ask her to do a picture of his a while back, and she told him to get lost. Laura asks the women to describe Templeton. Miss Mayo provides a description which matches Steele's earlier description of the man he had seen with Yvette backstage at the ceremony. Dorothy Lamour comments that he used to donate money to the archives, and Nolan editorializes that he must have been trying to buy some respectability.
Yeah, and it's funny because we've seen this concept already in the episode with Veronica Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
There was that character who was claiming to make a movie that he never intended to make, but was going to use a tax write-off. So this is obviously been recycled in this episode, but it works because, again, this is something that happens all the time. Movies get optioned and they get the stars and they put it, but they just never get off the ground, right? So,
or they get entirely filmed and then just shelved, but we won't mention Disney.
A la Batgirl.
Yeah.
Sorry. Anyway, we're good.
But we won't mention Disney. We won't mention them because we don't want to get sued. Anyway,
yeah, please don't sue us.
Laura begins to theorize. Supposing Templeton seduced Yvette into giving him large amounts of money, she finally realized she'd been taken, found Templeton backstage at the ceremony, then threatened to go to the police, so he had to kill her and brought her back to the house. Nolan says, "Yeah, I'll buy that." And Julian, who is the only one, despite my having said he didn't seem to be a rocket scientist, he's the only one paying enough attention to keep an eye on what's going outside, says, "Hey, somebody's coming." So Steele orders everyone to scatter, and everyone hides, and then Steele douses the light, grabbing his hiding place. A dark figure with a flashlight appears at the doorway of the bedroom and then enters, and it is Templeton. In the dark, he moves to the safe, and then suddenly the lights come on. Steele, holding up financial documents, asks, "Looking for this?"
Good thing Templeton didn't have his gun.
Well,
he could have just shot them then and there. Like
he just didn't come prepared.
Yeah.
Templeton stands, knocks the lamp off the table, throwing the room into darkness, save for the light from the hallway. Templeton runs to the doorway, with everyone coming out of hiding and trying to dogpile on the man. And in the process, the door to the room is closed, making the room completely dark. A few moments later, the struggle ends, the lights come back on, and we see that Julian has Laura pinned up against the door, raised up, her feet dangling below her. Steele and Lloyd Nolan are locked in combat with each other, and Miss Mayo and Miss Lamour are looking on in astonishment at the spectacle. But no Templeton.
No.
Lloyd Nolan punctuates his displeasure with Steele's skills, saying, "There's a nice move, Steele." And then they all rush out of the room and try to follow Templeton. In the limo, everyone has resumed their previous positions. They are chasing Templeton, but not quick enough to suit Lloyd Nolan, who urges the temporary Fred to burn some rubber. They follow over various streets, ultimately following their suspect to the offices of Templeton Enterprises. Arriving at the scene, with Templeton already inside, everyone piles out, and Steele runs into the building. Laura seems to be ready to follow, but Mr. Nolan stops her, demanding, "Buy the book, Miss Holt. We've got him trapped. Call for backup."
Yeah, who did they call?
The police.
Ghostbusters? Oh, well, yeah, okay. That makes sense. Sorry. No, I wasn't. Yeah, I suppose they could call the police.
Yeah. Anyway, Laura hesitates and then says, "Right."
But then, she doesn't do it.
Exactly. Ignoring his urgings and even her own agreement, she takes off and joins Steele in the building. Inside,
I mean, there's a phone in the limo.
Yeah. But who are you going to call?
Ghostbusters.
Yeah. And a lawyer for stealing the theme music from Huey Lewis. I want a new drug.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, inside, Laura finds herself in a semi-dark room filled with abandoned props. It's the sort of place that in the daytime might be colorful and fun, but at night, with everything indistinct in the shadows of random patches and light and pools of darkness, feels like the creepy birthplace of terrors unspeakable.
It's nightmare fuel for sure.
Yeah. Yes. As she cautiously makes her way through the room, whispering out loudly as she can to Steele, while simultaneously trying to be as quiet as she can, there are weird, unexpected sounds coming from unidentified places, and suddenly a hand reaches from behind a large object, which is hiding someone, and the unknown assailant grabs her, covering her mouth, roughly pulling her toward her doom. Or it's Mr. Steele pulling her toward his hiding spot that he's in and shushing her. After a moment, they cautiously lean out from their hiding place, but as they do, a totem pole is suddenly pushed over, aimed directly at them. They jump back to avoid being crushed and then quickly move out of the area. They continue to make their way through the building. Then we see a large biplane hanging from the roof, which is then launched toward Laura and Steele, who jump out of its path as it comes crashing down. We see Templeton begin climbing a ladder on the far wall, climbing up to a catwalk, which is running across the building. Well, Steele's had it. He is mad. Laura, who is wisely at this point having second thoughts about the pursuit, suggests that they wait for the police.
Who she hasn't called. So
yeah,
you might want to get on that.
Well, I guess she assumes that somebody is doing it on the car phone.
Yeah.
But Steele, no, he's indignant at the suggestion that he back off now. He says, "He tried to run over me, shoot me full of bullet holes, and now he's dropped a Sopwith Camel on us. Come on, let's grab the bugger." I'm not sure that was actually a Sopwith Camel, but okay. We get the idea.
It's still
anyway,
funny. Yeah.
Steele and Laura climb up the catwalk, with Steele going up the ladder on one end, Laura climbing the ladder on the other end of the catwalk. At the top, they have Templeton caught between them. Laura grabs a metal pipe with which to confront their quarry. Templeton turns away from her and the pipe and straight into the arms of Steele, who will not be denied the pleasure of beating Templeton to a pulp with his bare hands. During the struggle, Laura's knocked down. Steele breaks through the old decayed wooden safety rails, hanging on to Templeton to keep from falling. Laura gets back on her feet and attacks Templeton from behind with the pipe, who turns and hits her, knocking her down again.
He hits her hard. This is one of the few times where she gets a full-on punch to the face from a man. Like usually when they have these fights, if there's generally, if Laura gets fisticuffs, it's usually a female adversary, right? Judith Light or that Steele eligible. She goes after, she gets to fight Millicent Fairbush, what have you. She doesn't usually take on a male assailant in, fist to fist. And if she does, there's usually a weapon they try to hit them with or something. This time he punches her straight in the face.
Yeah.
And it was a kind of like oh, wow, okay, that was not what I was expecting kind of moment, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, his hitting Laura gives Steele an opportunity to regain his footing back up on the catwalk. He finally gets Templeton in his grasp and with a punch knocks Templeton back and off the catwalk and down to the floor below. Templeton, having landed on top of various pieces of prop work, is seemingly down for the count. But as Laura and Steele look down in satisfaction, one end of the catwalk beneath them begins to break loose, and realizing that the entire structure on which they are standing is in imminent danger of coming apart and falling, taking them with it, Laura admonishes Steele to stop admiring his handiwork and let's get out of here. So they run to the ladder at the end of the catwalk they run to the ladder at the end of the catwalk just as the catwalk completely collapses, with Laura and Steele having barely gotten off and onto the ladder in time. We see Laura and Steele hanging onto the ladder, smiling at each other in triumph, and we hear Mildred's voice in the voiceover saying, "She doesn't get it. That's the end of the story. How did the two of them get hurt?" And then we see the ladder start to fall backward and hear Steele and Laura panic and fall out of frame, followed by a loud crash. And then Mildred quietly saying, "Oh." Back at the hospital, in the present, Steele is looking at a newspaper headline which reads, "Steele traps Harwood killer." But Mildred has a question and a math problem. She tells Steele that something doesn't add up. He gives her a dirty look. She points out that if Yvette Harwood was killed at the ceremonies, why was the cause of death listed as a heart attack? Well, Steele and Laura look at each other with no answer. And Laura asks, well, who signed the death certificate? Steele checks the newspaper and reads, Dr. Roger Chandler.
Would a newspaper have that information? I don't think I've ever read about a celebrity death and seen who signed the death certificate in the article. I mean, I get it. They need to know for the plot, but it just seems like an odd detail in a news article.
Well, I can see where there might be stories about the attending physician ruling that, this is the cause of death or something like that. They may not specifically say that.
Certificate. Like that part I could see. I could see the article saying cause of death was determined by her personal physician, Roger Chandler, who found her at her home. Whatever, right? But
even that would imply that he was the one who signed the death certificate, but not necessarily guarantee that was the case. So the wording is a little bit weird here. But Steele does a double take and asking why the name sounds so familiar. And then he, of course, realizes that Dr. Roger Chandler is the doctor who treated him at the ceremony. And according to the newspaper article, he was Yvette Harwood's personal physician, although he was acting as the house doctor on the night of the ceremonies award, the award ceremonies. And that was when he had received that urgent phone call from her at 9:00 complaining of chest pains. Laura says she recalls the beeper going off. Steele reads that he rushed over to her house, but she was already dead. And Laura realizes that would have been impossible because Steele had just seen her backstage. Mildred points out that beepers can be self-activated, which is true.
Okay, that was my question. I didn't know if that was the case because the only thing I know about beepers is that Buffy got one in season 1 and said, "If the apocalypse comes, beat me." But other than that, I know nothing about beepers because
call me, beat me, if you unreach me. Impossible.
Gotcha.
A friend of mine from years and years ago was working for, I guess at this time he was working for a publishing company, not like a magazine or newspaper company, but they did printing for publishing.
Okay.
And he was their, I guess you'd call it, executive document courier. He would take important documents, contracts, proofs, that sort of thing, back and forth between the company and clients and such. And he had a beeper with him. And he told me one time that what he would do sometimes at lunch is if he was in a hurry to get lunch, because he only got, like a short lunch period. And if he went into somewhere like a Burger King or whatever, and there was a long line,
he'd be, I know where this is going. That's clever.
He would flip it and people say, "Oh," and he said, "Oh man, I got it." And they, "Oh, go ahead. And they let him jump the line in order.
That's funny. I mean, that's clever. You got to give him props. That's
yeah. Well, he was that kind of a guy. He would think of that, and he was always pulling gags on different people, different things, and I got him back once, so I got him back really good. Anyway, Mildred points out that beepers can be self-activated, and then when they realize that the doctor was in on it, Steele tells Mildred to call the police, except that the phone is dead. No problem. She'll use the phone out at the nurse's station. So Mildred leaves, and while they're waiting for her, Laura and Steele talk. Dorothy Lamour had said that Yvette had changed since she'd become involved with Templeton. Laura surmises that the medication supposedly prescribed for depression by Dr. Chandler will probably be found to contain drugs that deepen depression, not cure it, that they would have probably kept Yvette's mind foggy, making it easier for Templeton to influence her to write him big checks, and that they had probably purchased an insurance policy on her. After all, once they finished bilking her of all her assets, they could have one big last payout. With Chandler and Templeton both at the awards ceremonies, they would have had perfect alibis. He trips his beeper in the presence of witnesses, goes to Yvette Harwood's house where she would be depressed and in bed, where she could easily be killed, and then the doctor could certify that she died of a heart attack. Chandler and Templeton split the insurance money, and no one would be the wiser.
I do like this addition of a second killer, and that there was it's a good, it ties up the plot really nicely, and it gives us like a little bit of I guess more to Mildred just listening to the story and, oh, that's the end of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, she comes up with the missing thread that they'd overlooked. Yeah. Except, of course, Yvette showed up at the award ceremony, fouling up the plan, and then when Steele saw her, when he went to look for Virginia Mayo, that kind of sealed their complication there. The problem was that the bottle on the prescription, the problem is that the label on the prescription bottle would have been prepared by a pharmacist, and wouldn't a pharmacist have caught it if a medication supposedly prescribed for depression was inappropriate?
One would
That's my question.
I mean, probably. Unless she
the pharmacist was in on it too.
Well, no, unless she got the proper medication and somehow meds were switched, but I don't know. Yeah,
it just, that seemed like a little bit of a glitch to me.
It is.
Anyway, Laura admits that she never thought she'd be grateful for Steele's infatuation with Hollywood. And then she realizes that Mildred's been gone an awfully long time.
Yeah.
For simply just making a phone call. She gets up and begins to make her way to the door and steps out to look for Mildred, only to find that the hall is empty and quiet. It's too quiet. It's dead quiet.
Dead quiet.
Steele is puzzled and then concerned. The Godfather, Marlon Brando, Al Pacino, 1972. One of Brando's enemies clears the hospital where he's recovering just so that he can set up a murder. He urges Laura to get them out of the room, maybe even out of the entire hospital. As she hops toward the bed and Steele on her bad leg and crutch, the good Dr. Chandler appears at the door, cheerfully asking, how are they doing? He says that he went to the Harwood house late the previous night after hearing about Templeton, and they have a bottle of pills that he wants back. He gets a hard look on his face and then coldly says, it's a pity. He then sweeps his foot out, kicking the crutch out from under Laura, causing her to fall to the floor at the foot of the bed. The doctor steps over to the bed to Steele, grabs a pillow from underneath Steele's leg, causing him to holler out in pain, and then presses it down over Steele's face. You were going to say?
No, I just, we're going back to us talking about the traction and the wires and stuff like that. Like this,
It comes in handy here. Yes, that is true.
Yeah.
As Steele struggles against the pillow, Laura looks on and realizes that the weight holding Steele's arm up is within her reach. She grabs the weight, unties it, releasing Steele's arm, allowing him to strike the good doctor on the head with his cast, knocking the doctor out. Really? With a cast?
It's magical Hollywood where just one blow to the head knocks somebody out. Unless it doesn't.
Yeah, unless it doesn't. Well, Laura crawls over to the side of the bed and pulls herself up, grabs Steele's hand, and congratulates him on his right. Next, we see Mildred, head bandaged. She's sitting in a chair next to Steele's bed.
She's in her element.
Laura is sitting on the bed with Steele, and Mildred is telling her story to the Hollywood trio.
Yeah.
A sap the size of DiMaggio's glove. The world exploded in a kaleidoscope of colors. I reached for the wall, but it wasn't there. A black hole opened at my feet, and I fell into the beckoning vortex. And Nolan compliments Mildred's story, telling Steele that she's good.
Yeah.
Steele says that they call her Eat Lead Krebs.
I like that. That's a funny name.
Well, Nolan likes it too.
Yeah.
He likes that as her nickname. Virginia Mayo thanks Steele for trying to protect them, even though he did almost get them killed, as Dorothy Lamour points out. And Steele, giving a half smile, assures them that it's all in a day's work. And there it ends.
Yeah.
Anything else to add?
No, it's a cute episode. Again, I feel like season 3 so far has had some cute episodes, but none of them have been hugely standout, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2, and that's a shame, especially since they had so much of a budget this year. But yeah, this is I like this. I like the fanboying. I like the case. The plot is good. We're not really a huge fan of the frame narrative, but I can overlook it for the sake of the whole. So yeah, it's a good episode.
Well, if that's it, then on the website you will find show notes. You will not find Amazon links on this one because there are so many movies.
Too many. Can't fit them all.
And we probably can't fit them all. Plus Bitly, which we use as our link shortener to save characters, because you're only allowed so many characters in these show notes. They limit you to how many times you can use that a month. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a text document that we load into the Facebook Steele Watchers group, and we will have a link to that document so that if you want to get the Amazon links that'll take you directly to these movies in Amazon USA or Amazon Canada, that link will take you to that document. That document will take you to those Amazon links. So that's what we'll do for those. And in addition to all those things, we're going to have other resources such as
Facebook page, Instagram, and Twitter, or X as Elon wants to call it, as well as
the unknown.
Yeah, the
Solved
Facebook
for unknown.
Steele Watchers officially unofficial Facebook group, Steele Watchers, which if you'll have to join to get the list of movies. So you should, it's like we're luring you in. Come and join us. Join us. Yeah.
Come to my, what was it? Come to my.
Step into my parlor, said the spider to the fly.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
There we
go. I got stuck on the word there, parlor.
Yeah.
So that is, well, there's actually one more thing. We also have on the website ways that you can support the show with financial contributions, either as a monthly subscription or a one-time donation through PayPal. Now, in relationship to that, we don't normally make a big deal of it. We mention it in passing. Sometimes we don't even mention it at all. So obviously, we're not really pushing any kind of the support thing. We do appreciate people who do support us financially, but we don't make a big deal out of it. However, we do want to mention this one time that one of the services that we use to put this podcast together several months ago got bought by another company that has a history of jacking up the prices for the services of companies that they buy. And we knew it was coming. And we looked around, and Sara can verify. We looked at some other alternatives that were going to be less expensive than the anticipated price increase. But unfortunately, they were all lacking in some way, either in some feature and capability or in some convenience, simplicity of operation, or whatever. So we've decided to stick with this existing service. They've raised the prices by 80%, going from about $25 a month to about $45 a month.
Because they can.
And, it's all about the money. Follow the money, and it's going straight into their pocket. So if you are not a subscriber on a monthly basis or have not made a one-time donation, if you are enjoying the podcast in any way, getting any kind of benefit and value and enjoyment out of it, we would ask you to please think about contributing financially in some way. Monthly subscriptions start at $3 a month. You can cancel that at any time you want. You're not obligated to stick with it. One-time donations, they are just that, one time. And if you want to repeat them at some point in the future, you can. But we would definitely appreciate the additional support. Right now, Sara and I are covering this out of our own pocket. We will continue to look for alternatives in the future that are going to be less expensive to reduce our costs, but you never know if it'll happen or not. So
every little bit helps.
Yes. If you would be so kind to at least give some thought to it, we would greatly appreciate it. Again, we're not in this for the money. If we were, we'd be hounding you about it every episode. We don't take advertising. Not that we'd make any money on advertising because we don't have that many listeners. But yeah, it's just something we do, and we're covering it out of pocket. And if you're getting anything out of this, any kind of enjoyment or pleasure, information, if you value
Laughing
for
at
value,
us.
if you're getting some value out of our work here, we would appreciate seeing some value back from you. So, having humiliated myself and groveled for money, next episode, Breath of Steel.
Woo.
That's me spraying stuff in my mouth. Oh, anyway. Well, that's it, I guess. So we'll talk to you later, folks. It's been a long one. Sorry about that. But hey, what can we say? I blame the flashback.
Yeah.
So, talk to you later, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, everybody. Eric and Sara here. Just a quick announcement to let you know that, yes, we do appreciate everyone who listens, participates, and supports the podcast in whatever way you do. But we wanted to give an extra thank you to those who are so graciously giving to be monthly financial supporters.
We are making live streams of our recording sessions available to anyone who is a monthly financial supporter. So not only can you watch us live as we record our podcast episodes, you will be getting access to the raw, behind-the-scenes, unedited version of episodes before they get officially released.
And Sara, does that include our mistakes and screw-ups and our humiliating?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
every
it does.
Single one of them.
Every single one of them, yes. So again, this is just an extra thank you to those who are going above and beyond. But whether you choose to become a monthly financial supporter or not, we still love you. We want to say we thank you for your support, your encouragement, and your feedback.
If you want to become a monthly financial supporter, please visit our website at www.SteeleWatching.com to sign up.